Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of The Green Rush. I'm David Rabinovitz, and I'm joined by the founder of PCM, Jimmy Young. You may remember Jimmy because he used to host the show with me. We've got another good show coming up for you today. For those of you, I've been told I have to explain why I'm wearing a hat today. And I'm wearing a hat today because after 2 years of COVID and inactivity, I've started to do some exercising again, and that interfered with getting a haircut. And I'm afraid to take the hat off on air. So that's why I'm wearing a hat today.
Maybe we'll guilt you into that, David. I don't know.
Maybe.
At least it has a B on it. But I will tell you, I'm not expecting to see much baseball this year. I'm just going out on a limb saying that the two sides are not going to come to any kind of an agreement. I think the season at least will be delayed, and they will not come to an agreement until it gets closer and closer to opening day and they start losing more money. That's enough
okay,
baseball talk.
Jimmy, we're talking about cannabis today here in the Green Rush.
I understand that.
The sports show was an hour ago.
I understand that too. And David, we have a very interesting topic to talk about today and some really cool guests coming on with us. Okay. The premise of this show, and David, I'm sure you recognize this as well, is there really isn't a test for driving under the influence of cannabis which has been approved for any kind of widespread testing amongst law enforcement. So operating under the influence of alcohol, that's been around for a while. Mothers Against Drunk Driving has done a great job about making everyone aware of the dangers of doing that. But what about operating under the influence of cannabis? And I don't know about you, David, but when somebody ingests cannabis with an edible and maybe has a little too much of an edible, I don't even want to walk, let alone get behind the wheel of a car. How about you?
Well, Jimmy, I'll tell you what, I think I shared this quite some time ago. I don't know if it was on the Green Rush or the predecessor show.
I know
the first time I tried an edible was back in 2019. It was March, because I remember it well. We had been to the Harvest Cup some months before. My fiance had picked up some edibles, which she got by buying a t-shirt, and they threw in the edibles as a gift. But these weren't state qualified edibles. They had come out of New York. They were unregulated, I guess you would call them. So in Massachusetts, where if you get a chocolate bar, each square can have no more than 5 milligrams, the squares in this chocolate bar had 22.5 milligrams. I didn't bother to do the math. I have a sweet tooth. Anybody who knows me knows that. And at the time, my sweet tooth was raging. There was nothing else left in the house to eat. So I said, I'll crack open that weed bar. I took one of the squares. I said, it tastes a little different, but it's still chocolate and it's still sugar and it's still pretty good. 10 minutes later, I went back and I had another piece, and then another one and another one. Now, Beth had wanted to go out for a drink that night, and she's not a heavy drinker. We got in the car, probably about a little over an hour after I had consumed it, and probably got maybe a mile from the house, and I began to feel a little woozy, but I knew we weren't going far. Slowed down, drove the other mile, pulled in the parking lot, and I didn't want to park between two cars. So I went to the back of the lot to find a safe place to park. I was okay, got out of the car. I mean, I wasn't okay to drive a long distance, but it was a very short distance. I was on the road. I got off the road quickly. We went into the Ashland brew house, spent a while there, and all I could do was just about giggle. I wouldn't have any alcohol. I kept drinking club soda, figuring maybe somehow I'll flush my system. And about an hour or so later, she was ready to leave. And I said to her, you need to get off the chair first. And you got to just put your hand out. I'm not sure if I can stand up. Fortunately, she was okay to drive home, but my plan was to leave the car there and take an Uber home. And when the next morning, when I got up, I did the math. I had 90 milligrams of edibles on my first time.
So admittedly, you were afraid to get back in the car and drive again, right? Because
I wasn't afraid at all, but I have enough judgment to know it wasn't a good thing. And I said, look, don't worry about it. We're 3 miles from the house. I'll take an Uber. I'll leave the car here. I'm not going to risk it. It doesn't make any sense. It's not worth the consequence of what could happen.
Right. So what has happened this week is a marijuana breathalyzer has now been studied, and they have discovered how to actually measure how much THC you might have in your system. This was a discovery and a study conducted by Massachusetts General Hospital and published in the Journal of Neuropsychopharmacology. David, I know you subscribe to that, right?
Subscribe to it, Jimmy. I've got like 15 editions just laying around here. That's how I keep the table from wobbling.
You want to try and buy a vowel and spell that word, by the way? Anyway, we will have on at the bottom of this hour at 4:30, John Carmichael, who's on the Cannabis Advisory Board for Massachusetts. He's also the Newton Police Chief and has been involved with this legalization movement as a spokesperson for law enforcement for a number of years in the state of Massachusetts. I'm actually really looking forward to it. David, I'm sure when you start talking to John, you're going to enjoy him too. We've talked about John Carmichael on this show before, I know.
Yep.
So we now have a breathalyzer. It was a Harvard medical school professor who had this study, and now they believe that they can now measure with this breathalyzer how much THC you have in your system. That does not, however, measure impairment. I mean, right? It just doesn't. And this is why there is a, I think it's, what is it? 0.80 for alcohol in your system, or you're operating under the influence. I know by 1.0, you're over the limit. So I think it is a 0.80 limit for alcohol. And it's always been a challenge for law enforcement to recognize people who are driving under the influence of cannabis. And there are trainings now, and there are officers who are trained in this DRE, which is drug recognition expert. David, let me ask you a question. When you're under the influence of cannabis, how obvious is it to the people around you?
Jimmy, that's not a good question to ask me. I as anybody who knows me knows, I am not a heavy user.
Right.
I have been a user of cannabis on a regular basis for probably 13 months now. And I generally take it before I go to sleep.
Right. It's a medicinal product that can be used recreationally. And a lot of people do use it for sleep, because sleep is a big disorder in this country, all over the world. And it is important. And there are certain cannabinoids, little chemicals that make up this cannabis plant, that are extracted from this cannabis plant. And they study the various cannabinoids in that. And sure enough, Oregon State this week released another research study on the relationship between some of the chemicals inside the cannabis plant and whether they have any effect at preventing or killing COVID viral cells in a human. Now, this was not a human study. This was a lab study. And it's interesting, David, because in this era of social media, as soon as you release this story, okay, social media goes crazy. Oh my God, I know if I smoke weed, I'm not going to get COVID. So I'm going to go out and smoke weed, right? I mean, that is not what the research study said. But as you might imagine, there are people out there who took it and went to the nth degree. Are you surprised by that?
No, I think I recollect seeing one of the late night talk show hosts saying something about, no, Ma, that's not marijuana. That's my anti-COVID medicine in my sock drawer. And I promise it's not mine.
It was a friend of mine who happened to be here and dropped it in your own sock drawer, right? You've heard those excuses. So needless to say, there has been some pushback from the scientific community and the researchers themselves about, like, slow down. This is not the real cannabinoids from the plant. They are artificially created chemicals that are like THC and like CBD, just two of the bigger cannabinoids in that plant. And we being Pro Cannabis Media, responsible enough, we reached out to our doctor, Dr. Mary Clifton, She is a certified medical doctor out in the New York City area and an expert on cannabis. She has her own show on Pro Cannabis Media called The Dr. Mary Show. We spent all night trying to figure out what should we call this show, and we came up with that creative title. Don't you think, David? Dr. Mary Show?
All night it took you, huh, Jimmy?
It did, all night long. Anyway, we talked with Dr. Mary. I think Dan has this video ready to go. Let's run it, Dan, and you'll hear Mary's explanation of this research and why it isn't about creating something in a lab. At some point, we do need to research this with real people using the cannabis that is grown in the various states around the United States. Check it out.
We're accumulating quite a bit of research in the laboratory, not really in the human model, but in the laboratory that talks about the immune modulating effects of cannabis. And so what I really want people to hear from this study is that there are components that we have known for a long time that modulate the immune system and help with an adequate and appropriate immune response when you're using cannabis. But what companies do when they're trying to design a product is they take, a molecule of interest and then look at all of the molecules around that molecule of interest and start to study them. They, run inflammatory mediator markers. They run markers for, blood counts in case it may help with anemia. They'll run markers for all kinds of conditions that they think that molecule might work on. And then they have a result like this, where this particular molecule appears to have a specific benefit. But you don't need to race to the internet and find a producer for this exact molecule. What the best thing to do is to continue to consume the whole plant, continue to use the flower or use an edible that's made from a full spectrum plant so that you can get some of this product along with what we just have to assume are a whole bunch of other really good compounds for you in the whole flower.
And it supports Kurt Dalton and I had an opportunity to talk with Dr. Igor Kovalchuk when the pandemic began, and he did 3D modeling on the same kind of thing. And again, trying to explain this to laymen, perhaps for people who have no idea about the power and how cannabis works with the neurotransmitters and how it, and it gloms onto some of the endocannabinoid chemicals in our bodies. It's still kind of foreign. And again, for someone who doesn't understand science, this is why we love you and respect you so much. You can explain that there are, this plant does positive things to your immune system, bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, within cannabis, we have, THC and CBD that everybody knows about. And those are very commonly well-recognized cannabinoids, but there are over 300 other cannabinoids in the plant. So various cultivars, various strains that you can find are going to have different cannabinoids be represented within that strain. And that leads to the experience that you have. If you have a more of like an inward thoughtful psychedelic experience, or if you have a calm experience that helps you to fall asleep, a lot of that has to do with the presence or absence of different minor cannabinoids. And now we've identified, with some certainty that there are some other minor cannabinoids that work particularly well to help you to not get infected. Because, when you get sick with COVID or with the flu or with any of these other, these molecules from somebody else's sneeze or from somebody else's cough, these respiratory secretions get, you suck them in and they attach to the respiratory epithelium in the back of your throat. So it's such a disgusting thought to think about sucking in somebody else's respiratory secretions to get sick, but that's how it works. And so this product that can block those spike proteins so that they can't connect to the respiratory epithelium really help. I mean, it may help by simply stopping the opportunity for that bug to connect, and then it just gets swallowed down into your GI tract and chewed up in your stomach. Or that bug can maybe attach at 10% of what it was going to. And that's great too, because then you have this lower inoculum and you're not going to get as sick as somebody who gets a really big, juicy secretion attached.
That's Dr. Mary Clifton. And you know what? The thing we love the most about Dr. Mary is she's so human, even though she's a brilliant medical doctor who understands the endocannabinoid system and how this all works. Now, I just want to again clarify that the head of this study, Richard Van Bremen, a professor of medicinal chemistry at Oregon State, and it was the lead author of this study, explained that researchers wanted to investigate what natural products might help humans fight off this virus. They discovered that 3 compounds in hemp had a high ability to bind to the spike protein that allows the novel coronavirus to enter human cells so easily and thus spread COVID-19 so quickly. The three compounds, what's up with my mouth? Compounds are CBDA, CBGA, THCA. And in cannabis biochemistry, acids are the biosynthetic precursors to the cannabinoids that activate receptors in humans, i.e., they get you high. This means in simple terms, the cannabis compounds studied in this research are not the cannabis compounds most weed users seek when they go to the dispensary, and they are not the compounds you ingest when you are eating an edible or smoking a joint. They transform these chemicals as soon as they get, as soon as you light up, as soon as you heat them up. So the idea here is this was as Yogi says in the chat room, I'm not sure I'm going to use the same words, but BS. And, you know, what it shows, David, more than anything else is the plant is medicinal. It has qualities that need to be studied. We need to make sure that the federal government makes changes so that we can research this plant so we can understand its benefits, because we all know it's been around and used as medicine for thousands of years. Right, David?
True, Jimmy. That is true, Jimmy. And you said that just in time for me to remind you, it's 4:20. Actually, it's a little after 4:20. Stick with us. We're going to be right back because Jimmy's here, so we have to take his 4:20 break. Enjoy.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just, you know, like every other night, just going to lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works. It's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard. It's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm going to sit down in my rented car. I'm going to jam it into drive. I'm going to head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're going to lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on every night and day. We're going to lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday. Thank God. Thank God Jonathan Edwards is joining us live in the WSCA.
I'm a fan.
That's Liz Grow, Pro Cannabis Media's newest show host for a new show, Calling All Growers with Liz Grow. Liz is a High Times TV personality who'll be joining our talk show.
I'm a fan.
That's Liz Grow, Pro Cannabis Media's newest show host for a new show, Calling All Growers with Liz Grow. Liz is a High Times TV personality who'll be joining our talk show program starting in February.
I picture a company that stands the test of time.
Stopping at nothing to meet the people who are growing this plant generation after generation.
Calling All Growers will be more than just another interview and talk show, especially if you subscribe to the Calling All Growers workshop and webinar. That's 2 weeks after the live talk show on the same growing network, Pro Cannabis Media and PCM TV.
This is a show about interviewing the top growers in the game. It's a platform where they can share tips, tricks, and secrets for those growers coming up. Cultivators are some of my favorite people in the world, and I can't wait to talk to some of these growers.
It all starts on Wednesday, February 9th, live at 8 p.m. Eastern on PCM TV, on Roku, Apple, and ProCannabisMedia.com. Subscription-only workshops 2 weeks later on the 23rd. Sign up today to hold your spot.
What's your favorite strain?
Free.
If you're a grower or interested in learning more, tune in or...
You're missing out. Calling All Growers with Liz Grow.
The Tanzanian cheetah can run upwards of 80 miles per hour. Tanzanian cheetah can run upwards of 80 miles per hour. Relying on keen eyesight, the cheetah hunts during the day. Here we see a cheetah driving down the desert road smoking a joint. What have I done? Now he's getting a DUI from the cheetah police, which means he'll have to go to cheetah court, pay up to 10,000 cheetah dollars, and probably end up in cheetah jail. Don't be like the Tanzanian cheetah.
Pro Cannabis Media Programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry. And by Artery Pay, easy, cheap, fun, and legal, just like cannabis should be.
Hey, everybody, and we're back. We've got a great guest. You're going to love this part of the show. We've got Chief Carmichael of the Newton, Massachusetts Police Department, but that's really not what he's known for. He has been on the front line of some of the issues related to cannabis in Massachusetts. He sits on the Cannabis Advisory Board for the state and is very, very tuned in and is going to be a great asset to us today as we begin to talk about some of the issues having to do with impaired operation of motor vehicles and cannabis. Jimmy?
That's right. And David, I've had the opportunity to talk a little bit with Chief Carmichael offline, as they say. And perhaps the best thing that came out of that was your master's thesis at Curry's College. Okay. So if you want to share that with us, because, you know, I'm an adjunct instructor at Curry too, yeah. But Chief John Carmichael joins us. Thank you so much again. And tell us a little bit about that dissertation you did.
Sure. Thank you. Happy to be here today. I went back to get my master's degree, I don't know, over 10 years ago at Curry College in Milton. And I've always had kind of the interest to see what was happening with medical marijuana was coming out and legalization and that kind of thing. So I did my thesis on that as a critical analysis, and thinking that I was never going to really use it for anything, but somehow I got roped into being involved with the original DPH, Department of Public Health selection committee that picked those original 20 dispensaries, registered marijuana dispensaries that were picked under medical. And then I got involved with all of the regulations too, and specifically the security regulations, which I am very proud of, because here in Massachusetts, we think, we all know about the fears we had with opening the establishments and everything, but we do really have probably the best security and the best regulations in the country.
Certainly the stiffest testing. I can attest to that because I've talked to a lot of people from MCR Labs and CDX Labs as well. And I do believe we're connecting to Thomas Howard out in Illinois, who's one of the hosts of a talk show out there as well. Hi, Thomas. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me, Jimmy.
No, it's good to see you too, sir. So there is a story that came out this week from the Harvard Medical School and Mass General that they now feel like they have a product or a tool to measure the amount of THC in your system and whether or not you are impaired. So this goes back to, if you look at alcohol, Chief Carmichael, tell me again, is it 0.80? Is that the limit for alcohol?
Well, 0.08 is a per se limit. So that's the limit that you are per se impaired under Massachusetts law, correct?
Got it. No, I got the point different. By the way, David knows I can't get decimals or anything on an Excel sheet right anyway. So 0.08. Okay. And I don't know. And Thomas Howard, an attorney, maybe he can enlighten us. How are they going to tell whether or not you are impaired by the amount of THC in your system? And I'm guessing that the lawyers are just kind of licking their chops to take this on in court at some point.
Lawyers very often licks their chops to take things on in court. And this would be one of them, of course. And the standardization that'll probably happen, because it's also 0.08 here in Illinois. And I can remember back in the time I've called the past, where it was higher than that. It was 0.1. Right. Usually there's some type of federal guidance tied to some type of, funding benefit, usually for infrastructure, so they can set a standard. But my question is always, when they're doing this, who is you? Like, how do we set that standard? Where do we draw that line? And I hope that we have a real debate and research and insight as to that. And it's not just some arbitrary number we pick out like we did with hemp. Hemp, we just arbitrarily pick out a number, 0.3. Okay, you see, that's the only thing that I really hope that happens when they do come up with the standards, because there's going to be one, that it makes some sense scientifically.
Right. And I think that's one of the things. And Chief Carmichael, this is a challenge for law enforcement now, because you no longer, if you smell cannabis from a car, is that a signal that you can check them out?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a signal that you should. And, many times, we try and talk about the dynamics of how this all plays out, right? So two chances are that one could be that a police officer observes a motor vehicle infraction, erratic operation, or whatever else, and they conduct a motor vehicle stop. And you may smell the odor of cannabis. You may make certain observations, and, the officer would be obligated to investigate that. And many times it'd be an exit order. Here in Massachusetts, we don't have standard field sobriety testing anymore, where the officer can conduct that the same way as alcohol. We call them roadside assessments. Officers can have somebody perform those assessments if they choose to, and the officers are not allowed to make a determination on whether or not a failure of that test occurred and that there is impairment associated with it. They can only testify to their observations. And the other way is a crash. Like, say, if there's a crash and there's suspected that there's impairment or any diminished capacity to drive the car, that, there would be an investigation. And it doesn't mean just cannabis. It means alcohol. It could be fentanyl. It could be a lot of different things. So
I actually was going to bring up the case of Mr. Tiger Woods, where they never released exactly why he drove off the road at 7 a.m. You know what I mean? Again, you can be operating under the influence of Percocet or any of the other opioids out there and be as dangerous, if not more, than others who are behind the wheel. The most important thing here, folks, as I always say, is educate yourself and learn. Over years of drinking alcohol, we have all learned, we think, what our limits are. And you know that if you eat a meal and have a glass of wine at dinner, you are not going to be drunk, okay? But you might already have some impairment with your driving, just because alcohol, like cannabis, affects individuals differently. Is that accurate, Thomas?
Oh, I'm not a doctor, but it's from, if you have a large enough data set and there's trends in that data. And so how do we get that large enough data set? And we can do these types of studies now. We could study how much, what that person has in their system. And then how do they perform? We have slaloms, we have driver's ed teachers. We could set this study up. We could set this study up in numerous colleges throughout the country. We've never had more legal supply, which we should study so that we can create these types of numbers. And I'm sure that number's out there. But I would love to see a data set like that, or some type of study. And maybe now that the federal blockade against cannabis research is being lifted, we might see such studies.
Chief Carmichael, I'm guessing law enforcement would certainly welcome some data. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. I think that, contrary to what some people might believe, I think the last thing officers want to do is arresting somebody, taking somebody off the street that they shouldn't be. It's really comes down to having the right tools to make sure that they're making the right decision. From my perspective, being a police chief, it's, you have to make those judgment calls where you have to be careful. You have to make sure that if you believe someone has a diminished capacity to drive, regardless of what substance it is, that you have to remove them from the roadway. That's your first and primary responsibility. And we really do try our best to do that. We're never right 1,000% of the time, but it's our responsibility to keep the road safe and to keep the individual safe. So we try our best to do that.
And now I'm going to give you a little bit about this Harvard discovery recently by Dr. Jody Gilman, who's with the Harvard Med and also with Mass General. This study had 169 cannabis users consume THC or a placebo and then submit themselves to it looks like it's NIRS scan. Those who'd consumed cannabis showed higher levels of neural activity in the prefrontal cortex of the brain when compared to those who consumed a placebo. Quote, "Our research represents a novel direction for impairment testing in the field," said Jody Gilman. And our goal was to determine if cannabis impairment could be detected from activity of the brain on an individual level. This is a critical issue because a breathalyzer type of approach will not work for detecting cannabis impairment, which makes it difficult to objectively assess impairment from THC during a traffic stop. So we reached out to Dr. Gilman, but she was not available to join us on such short notice, but we will try an effort and get her to talk a little bit more about this. Everybody's different with this plant, and it affects people differently. And it also, even those who have used it for years and have a very high tolerance, and I'm not saying I do, but I know my limit. Okay. I know when I mistakenly took 2 25 milligram edibles, thinking they were 2 5 milligram edibles, and I lost the next day because I took them at 8 o'clock at night. And, everybody has edible stories. And Chief Carmichael, I'm going to tell you right now, I didn't want to go anywhere near the car because I didn't want to go near my bedroom at that point because I was uncomfortably high. And this is what the dangers are with the edibles. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and what's most importantly, like what you said, is knowing your limit, because the biggest thing, and here in Massachusetts, I think we've done a pretty good job of this, whether it be the Cannabis Advisory Board, the Control Commission, our public safety, public health. We try and send those reminders out that, you know what your limit is, be advised, be aware of, what can happen if you get behind the wheel, and do your best to prevent, impaired driving in the first place. And if we did that, that would work. That would be fine.
Yeah. Hey, Thomas, I don't know how old you are, but I know I remember the 60s and 70s. And there used to be a front license plate on a lot of cars, let's just say, that said "Arrive stoned," which was obviously meant that you're in the car, you might as well get stoned. Do you remember those front plates by any chance, Thomas?
No, but I am 287 in dog years. And so, and that would be one of the ways that I would test people to see if they're stoned. Be like, well, what's 287 in dog years? They'd be like, well, what's a dog year? 7 years. Okay, just
41.
There you go. But yeah, it must not be stoned enough. But it's a good time, I tell you. So yeah, I don't really have much more to add on that one, but it's interesting news. That's not the news that I thought that you guys were going to be discussing. The big news that I saw had to do with cannabinoids in a certain thing that's going around right now.
Yes,
because we're on social media. I don't even want to mention it because they would just censor people for that. And so the Beard Brothers Farms lost one of their Instagram accounts because they were sharing this story.
Yeah. Well, we're sharing the story. In fact, we talked about it live on this show. I also led our news with it this week on We Talk News. It was you're referring to the Oregon State research study. Chief Carmichael, did you see that by any chance?
No, I didn't, unfortunately, no.
All right, Thomas, again, we've gone over this. We've also heard from our medical director, Dr. Mary, on this. There's a big difference between creating the chemicals and what makes up the cannabinoids in the real plant and the actual plant. And that it gets lost a little bit in translation because, as we know, in the media, headlines drive eyeballs, right? And social media, as you said, Thomas, has been blowing up about this research study. People thinking, hey, if I go out and smoke enough weed, I'm never going to get COVID. That's inaccurate. That is misinformation. So I wanted to make sure when we did our news that we balanced our reporting, believe it or not. I know you find that a little strange, but that's what we tried to do. So Thomas, what was your reaction to the research study coming out of Oregon State?
It sounds a lot like the one that got one of our more popular videos yanked 2 years ago when my co-host Miggy on Cannabis Legalization News, don't forget to go check that one out and subscribe to that one.
Good job.
Miggy had, because he was in Seattle, and if we remember in the Wayback Machine, just to 2019, Seattle was one of the first sites that it was coming in because, of course, it is a port city. And then so he got sick in January of 2019. And then like in early of 2020, one of those stories started circulating about that. That may have been that's precursor to this study that's finally out now. And it turns out that raw cannabinoids, not decarboxylated cannabinoids, so non-psychoactive cannabinoids, may have a protective effect. And I said, that's interesting. Wish they hadn't yanked that video down. Oh, well.
Well, we certainly can get into the censorship of the cannabis industry as a subject because we've all been victims to that. And in fact, the only video that has been taken down in the 2 years that we've been producing content at Pro Cannabis Media had to do with a friend of ours that was denied a test in March of 2020 at Mass General, a COVID test. Now, this was, let's face it, guys, we've learned quite a bit about this virus since 2020. They pushed through the vaccination. There are a lot of people vaccinated. I'm vaccinated, not once, not twice, but 3 times, because I believe in modern medicine. And I also believe that if you have those vaccinations, you're not going to get as sick as you could if you didn't have those vaccinations. So
yes, and I'm very impressed with modern science. And I think modern science can also tackle the line in the sand that's going to be a standardization of what driving with THC in the system is. They're going to answer that. It's going to get answered some way. So I just hope that they do data and 10 studies, do 10 studies, do what do they call that? Where they take a study on the study. So they look at epidemiological.
Peer reviewed, I believe.
Something like that. I mean, I'd have to go get my science books out, which I don't use as much in my practice as a lawyer,
Right.
Are we talking about like a threshold limit or?
Yes. So there's a standard. So that standard would be able to tell law enforcement, here you go. It's a check the box type of thing. It makes it easier.
Yeah. That would be good. I know Massachusetts isn't really, when I was part of the Special Commission on Operating Under the Influence and Impaired Driving, which was created from Chapter 55 of the Acts of 2017, which was the adult use law. And so this commission came together. There was 13 of us from various disciplines and professions, and we came up with 19 recommendations that were submitted to the state and through the legislation. And that's been the recent one that was refiled. But we looked a lot at a per se limit, like with alcohol. I think in Colorado, they have an inference standard maybe, and Washington has per se, or it might be vice versa, but they have limits out there that they've established, even though the science hasn't been there really to support that. So Massachusetts, at least as of now, we're kind of staying away from that, using any type of a per se or even an inference standard.
That's good.
And here's David, I want you to chime in here whenever you're ready. Okay. You're still with us, right?
I'm here, Jimmy.
Okay. There's still, how is cannabis, and Thomas, I guess I'll ask you this directly. Do you feel that cannabis you are impaired when you are high, or does it actually, there's certain strains specifically, hyper-focus you and you become even more aware and alert on cannabis?
Oh, there's very many things that the cannabis plant will do to people. And its effects are usually why you're using it. And so what are you trying to go for with this experience? Are you trying to be sleepy and sedated? Then you should have this one. But I'm not sure if they're going to allow a menu item of well, Your Honor, it's fine. I was only having the white wine. That doesn't get you as drunk as the red wine. I don't know if they're going to allow for something like that, but there are different terpenes that allow for the user experience to be different. So I have your daytime coffee and your daytime weed, and then your nighttime stuff, or I've been injured and I'm trying to get some sleep and some sedation. There's different strains.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And David, you got anything? I'm waiting to see if you got anything to add here, pal. Go ahead.
I'll add. So a couple of years ago, I was at a Boston University pitch competition. And one of the groups, it was cannabis focused. And one of the groups with two young ladies who had developed an inhaler device that would, within 10 minutes, clear all your receptors in your brain if you were intoxicated. And I still remember the individual from the MSO who took their card. Haven't seen this device on the market yet, but these were two PhDs. So they seem to be pretty sharp people. And there's an old saying, the person who could invent it could never sell it. The person who could sell it could never invent it. And their presentation was not that good. But boy, they seem to be right on the money in explaining what the science was behind it. You don't have that in alcohol. You have too much alcohol. The only way you're going to get it out of your system is time. Right? To be able to have a device that could actually clear you within 10 minutes, that could be a boon in a number of ways, because we could cut down on impaired anything, impaired motor vehicle operation. Go into a smoking lounge and take as much as you want, whether it's edible, liquid, or vaporized somehow. And then when you're ready to leave, you take a shot of this, you wait 10 minutes and you go and you're fine.
I don't expect
really is the future.
I was going to say, I don't expect to be around in the next century. Okay. So, but I bet they'll develop something like that, because it's so amazing to me. Even, what was it, 15 years ago, we've learned so much about the brain. The Boston University has an amazing focus on CTE, the proteins that are created through multiple blows to the head and of course, they can only study the brains of National Football League players after they're gone.
Mhm.
So they've been able to see this protein. And I just wonder if there's something similar to what, in the future, where we can rebuild that protein in the brain. And I think about it, it's only been like 15 years that they figured out something my mother knew back in the 60s, that football causes brain injury. Okay. I mean, duh, right?
Well, yeah. It's interesting though, and like how far we've come in those 20 years. And we can just go faster now because of how technology works. It's going to be a really interesting 10 years. I mean, like the AIs are starting now. It's not like 10 years ago ones. I mean, the stuff that they're going to be making and like creating in 10 years is just going to be ridiculous. What happens once we're all on Neuralinks? Seriously, we're going to find out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Chief Carmichael, what would be, if you had the magic wand and you could create impairment measurement that was accurate and fair, is that what most law enforcement are looking for right now? How has the profiling of drivers or people changed in a legal state? Because there's a lot of people using this for the first time, maybe not on a regular basis, but they're out there. What has been the effect of legalization in Massachusetts as far as these kinds of arrests that had been going on for a long time? And I'm just talking about under the influence and operating a vehicle here.
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, to the first part, I think we've all recognized there's like no silver bullet to this. Like there's no, at least right now, we don't have some thing that's just going to come along and save the day as far as helping with how we address impaired driving in general. But I think that one of the issues that's come up a lot is drug recognition experts. And I understand the controversy with them. Here in Massachusetts, DREs are allowed to testify in court when they pass certain acceptances by the judge, and they could testify as an expert, but blanketly, like they can't do that. So part of the thing is that, like, and I said earlier that the last thing a police officer wants to do is arrest somebody that they shouldn't be, but they do that stop still does fall on them as far as liability and everything, and removing people that may be impaired off the road. With the drug recognition expert, I think when we talk about that, a lot of people think that we're looking to just establish evidence that the person is impaired. But to the contrary, many times what it also does is provide exculpatory evidence that they may not be, or that, there could have been other things that were going on at the time of the stop. But that's post-arrest. So that means that there's already been probable cause established from either the stop or a crash or something. And the drug recognition expert assessments happen after the fact. So right now, at this point, we've just kind of accepted that there's no silver bullet to this, and every stop and every factor and circumstance is going to be different, and you're just going to have to weigh each of those things as they come.
Thomas, are you familiar with that DRE, the Drug Recognition Expert Program? I think the International Chief of Police are involved with that curriculum. Am I right, Chief?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. I knew I read it somewhere. Thomas, what's your feeling about that? DREs.
It sounds like a decent program, but we don't have them in my practice. I just never come into contact with that aspect of it. I don't do any criminal law. The only stuff that I really do these days is strictly commercial, like, very, very corporate, and like shareholder disputes, negotiating the licenses, percentage ownerships, financial, injections into that, security interest, collateral, all sorts of fun things. Different world. Yeah.
But Thomas, I'm going to go out on a limb. Can you tell if someone you're talking to is under the influence of something?
Well, it depends on how coherent they are.
Right.
Right. And so if they aren't very coherent, you can tell. And so sometimes, yeah, and sometimes no, I can't. But usually I'm having like normal conversations every now and then because of the industry. We get a lot of calls over at cannabisindustrylawyer.com and like, 300 a month or so. And so sometimes there are some characters and we like to have screeners for that. So we don't really ever have to talk with them.
Cool. That is important too. I agree. I think we all agree and can understand that if you look at these two products that both have intoxicating elements to them, and of course, we're talking about cannabis and alcohol here. There's been tons of research now about how dangerous alcohol is. And I just wonder if there are people out there, and I know there are people out there in California, they're calling it California sober, who have actually stopped drinking alcohol because they prefer getting intoxicated, getting high through cannabis. Thomas, am I accurate about that?
Yeah, Cali sober. And it sounds like a way to be, man. Simply because alcohol has a whole list of things you really got to watch out for when it comes to health reasons. And then like also one of the leading causes of death is accidental. Some of those accidents are probably alcohol related.
Right. Well, also this is the amazing thing. And Chief, I'm going to ask you your opinion about this. Distractions, whether it's the phone, which is probably the biggest distractor and probably one of the biggest causes of motor vehicle accidents now. But what does it tell you now that they're actually putting screens in cars so that you can even be more distracted because it's built into your car. We all want hands-free driving. I make sure I do that through my Apple CarPlay. But how do you feel as a law enforcement officer now that you know that these cars have screens in them?
Yeah, it's absolutely scary. And you're right. We're talking about impaired driving here. One of the real biggest threats is people that are, on devices that are either talking on the phone or looking at their screen or doing whatever else. And the amount of crashes and fatal crashes that have occurred as a result are astounding. So that is definitely something to be concerned with. Thank God here in Massachusetts, it was a long time coming, but we had kind of a hands-free law for a little while, except it was pretty much unenforceable by the police because there was no way, there was only certain things on the phone that you weren't supposed to be doing, like texting. And now, the legislature kind of closed that up so that we do have a hands-free law now, which does allow, the device to be out of your hand and, like GPS or something up on the dashboard. So.
And we've got two driver services that use the phone as well in the car to pick up people and keep track of it all. So and yet we're also at the point, and I know you guys know this, where you have cars that can drive themselves. So we've reached a point now like that. I do want to talk a little bit about the dangers of both of these products. Okay. And if you've talked to any medical personnel, it's 8 times the buzz, if you will, if you start mixing alcohol and cannabis. And it's one of the reasons why whenever I go out to a restaurant, no matter whether I have this in my system or not, I'm only going to have one drink now. That's all I need. One drink will do it. I'm happy. I'm socially acceptable because I have an alcoholic drink in my hand. And yet, I also recognize that 8 times factor. Thomas, what's your experience, if you mind sharing, on any mixing going on?
What's the 8 times factor? I'm unfamiliar with that. I have consumed both products, but I don't chief a whole bunch. And so I'll have a few puffs and that's usually good for me. And then, I may have a beer with that. But I'm usually at home. Yeah.
Right. And that is the 8 times factor. So if you have consumed cannabis outside a bar and then go into a bar and you start sipping alcohol, you're going to be 8 times more inebriated and intoxicated than you would if you just stayed with water or non-alcoholic as a catalyst.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Well, you need to watch some of our shows, just like I would like to watch more of your shows,
Sure. Yeah.
Because it's the doctors that I've found to be the most fascinating about this, that as far as knowledge goes, because they're looking at it. They understand how the human body consumes and what impacts it has on you. And of course, now with all the brain research, we're learning even more. So again, Chief Carmichael, have we been balanced in our conversation here?
Yes, absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Good. That's what I want, because as an old media guy, the media takes a lot of abuse these days.
Yeah.
Everybody blames the media for everything. And I blame the consumers, because the consumer now is in charge of their use of media. They
Right.
get to choose what they watch, when they watch, and what they believe is correct. And as opposed to the old days where radio and television stations actually had to apply for a license to broadcast. Social media has no licenses, as we know, right? They self-police themselves with their content. And how's that working out for all of us, guys? You guys are laughing. You understand it. Hey, look, Thomas Howard, I know you got a heart out at 5 o'clock. I want to thank you not only for joining us here today, but also joining our regular staff of reporters on We Talk News, our weekly roundup of cannabis from state to state and coast to coast. So thank you, Thomas, for joining us. Chief Carmichael, great talking with you. I also am going to volunteer anytime you need someone non-law enforcement to come in and talk to, whether it's parent teacher groups or any citizens in my old hometown of Newton, Massachusetts. I will be available. And actually, the Bruce Apotheca show and Jimmy Young show should be worth a pay-per-view. I can tell you that.
I'd pay to see that. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much. We're going to take a break at the top of the hour, and we'll be back with more of Green Rush Live. And David, you're taking over the rest of the show.
So I personally like QuickBooks for MRBs. I wouldn't necessarily suggest QuickBooks for a plant touching company. And the reason for that is QuickBooks is still a little iffy when it comes to having a plant touching business or even anything related to the cannabis world as one of their customers. What I typically do when I use QuickBooks for an MRB is I don't necessarily put the title of the company as a title that's obvious that it's an MRB. I'll put the name of the LLC if it's not the same name as the company. I'll create a fake name, then just change the financial statements when I go to print them out, because I don't want QuickBooks to shut my customers down or shut my account down either. But it's still one of the best tools out there for a small business to use. And it's something that I use to run my business. It's something I use to run some of the clubs and societies that I work with. And it's also what I really direct my MRBs to utilize as well for their books and records.
I'm a fan.
That's Liz Grow, Pro Cannabis Media's newest show host for a new show, Calling All Growers with Liz Grow. Liz is a High Times TV personality who'll be joining our talk show program starting in February.
I picture a company that stands the test of time.
Stopping at nothing to meet the people who are growing this plant generation after generation.
Calling All Growers will be more than just another interview and talk show, especially if you subscribe to the Calling All Growers workshop and webinar. That's 2 weeks after the live talk show on the same growing network, Pro Cannabis Media and PCM TV.
This is a show about interviewing the top growers in the game. It's a platform where they can share tips, tricks, and secrets for those growers coming up. Cultivators are some of my favorite people in the world, and I can't wait to talk to some of these growers.
It all starts on Wednesday, February 9th, live at 8 p.m. Eastern on PCM TV, on Roku, Apple, and ProCannabisMedia.com. Subscription-only workshops 2 weeks later on the 23rd. Sign up today to hold your spot.
What's your favorite strain?
Free.
If you're a grower or interested in learning more, tune in or
You're missing out. Calling All Growers with Liz Grow.
Your way.
Okay, folks, thanks for hanging with us. We're back here on the Green Rush Live. I'm your host, David Rabinovitz, joined by the founder of PCM, Jimmy Young, and we've got a couple of great guests for this half hour. One of our local friends and attorney, Walter Sullivan, and another attorney, Nick Richards, out of the western part of the country. We're going to talk a little bit about what are the implications of driving under the influence, and we've got two great legal minds to help steer us through that conversation.
I think the answer is slower and with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
How many lawyers does it take to screw in a light bulb?
Depends on if you're in California or not. Oh, no, that's a hot tub.
I knew that this would be a fun segment. So how many lawyers does it take to screw in a light bulb, Walter? I'll finish.
Depends on how much money we want to make. Either that or we'll use paralegals.
So have either of you had a client in recent time who has had the problem of been accused of operating under the influence of cannabis?
I have not. As a prosecutor, I went after alcohol cases.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So where do you think that, where's the law, what's the state of the law right now on this?
So
it's difficult, right?
You have 50 states that are working on accepting the drug recognition experts. And really, is it really a science that should be accepted into evidence or not? And that's really the push. We're still having the whole issue of breathalyzer tests being tested this very day relative to the reliability of them. Mm-hmm. So to go to DREs, it's really a nightmare. There's a lot of training that takes place, and how effective are they, and how accurate are they?
Right. Nick, are you familiar with drug recognition experts and that curriculum that the chief of police all over the place are trying to, impose?
Let me remember. Is that the stand on one foot, raising and tap my nose? Is that what I'm supposed to do, Jimmy?
I will say that I have had a field sobriety test when I was actually driving a rent-a-car, and needless to say, when you drive a new a foreign car, if you will, not where they're made, but new to your own use of that vehicle, sometimes you tend to waver. And I did get pulled over, and I passed the field sobriety test. And yes, touching your nose it was part of that, Nick. So there you go.
And I think Jimmy, I'm sorry, Nick.
Go ahead, Walter. No,
Jimmy,
Walter,
before coming on the show, you can find anything on YouTube. So I went and checked on DREs being done in cannabis cases.
Okay.
And it's some people pass it, even though the test in Colorado that you use shows that they are under the influence. It's points. What, Nick? What's the test? 5 something.
Is it point? Well, 0.03 is the you hear that in the alcohol world a lot. I don't know what the limit is offhand. I mean, I think the essential problem is that and I think we probably have assumed that everyone is on this, but the test will test positive if you smoked 3 months ago or 3 weeks ago, right? And maybe not 3 months, but so that's the essential problem around it. And so we go to these, field tests. And I think that there is science that would say that some of the people can touch their nose better when they're on cannabis. And so I think that there's a real gap in between the evidence, there can be a real gap between what these tests and the evidence that they produce shows and what's really going on.
So Nick, from a public safety perspective, what's the solution then? How do we maintain safety on the roads while maintaining the liberty of the citizens to consume the plant?
Yeah. I mean, I think so, in the past, when we have talked about this topic, we've talked about, field sobriety tests and testing whether somebody can function correctly and having an officer do that can later be a witness in a case. I do know that there's a new study out of Harvard Medical School, I believe, that shows that is a promising for a new test. Yeah. So maybe we're getting there. We'll see. Right? It's just Jimmy, it's just a piece of paper right now, right?
Right. Well, the author is Jody Gilman, a doctor at Mass General and also a adjunct. I think she's an adjunct professor at Harvard Med. But here's my issue with this. I've talked and interviewed professional athletes who have played in front of many fans professionally under the influence of cannabis.
Yep.
And they say they focus better when they are.
Yep. Now,
I have admitted before, and I'll admit it again, although you noticed I didn't admit this when Chief Carmichael was on with us, at age 16 and a half, I passed my driver's test under the influence of cannabis. I'm not proud of that, but I had some that day at the beginning of school. And I remember getting in the car with my mom in the back seat and the instructor and going up, taking the left, doing a 3-point turn, coming back, parallel parking, fine, did it perfectly, and passed the test.
Jimmy, we all did it.
Yeah. Jimmy, you had to get rid of that anxiety. It was the only way you could pass.
And guys, we're joking a little, but we all know that the cannabis from the 70s, okay, is not the cannabis from the 21st century, okay? And again, it still goes back to learning your limits and understanding that this product interacts with different humans in different ways. And I don't know how in the world anybody is going to be able to test this and find out, maybe this new breathalyzer that Harvard Med came out with, which is tied to the frontal lobes, whatever, prefrontal cortex, right? That
sounds fancy.
Prefrontal cortex. David, how's your prefrontal cortex doing?
He's got to cover with a hat.
That's right. Well, we got into that a little bit too.
Jimmy,
But
Nick mentioned earlier about one of the tests is heart rate. Is there THC in your system? And and Nick hit it on the head. It's just it's going to be in your system. That doesn't mean you're high from it. Who was the singer that shaved her head so they couldn't test her for drugs in her system years ago?
Mm-hmm.
The Irish singer, Sinead O'Connor or something like that.
Yep.
About 20 years ago.
Is that why she did that?
I'm a former narcotics prosecutor.
I've heard mixed reviews on that, sir.
She looked pretty good bald though.
No, I do. And Jimmy, look, let's say this. Just because it's a drug doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to inhibit you, right? Caffeine will improve your performance, and caffeine is a drug. And so I think that there's a sort of a shock factor, kind of oh gosh, well, of course that's bad. Let's find out, right? Let's figure it out, right? I don't know how bad it is. I think we all could say that probably there is some problems there, and I'm sure there are. But we need to understand it better.
And I mean, Jimmy,
what Nick just said is what I keep going back to. As much as the cannabis industry lobby it wants legalization, decriminalization, to me, the best thing that could happen is they're starting to do this, is actually start researching the legally sold cannabis in each state. It just makes sense. The University of Mississippi has had that monopoly now for 40 years. I understand they grow really crappy weed. So let's study the stuff that I go to my medical dispensary and get, so we can learn more about this plant, because it's amazing that for years this was not studied. Yeah. It's just, and by the way, Nick, no disrespect, okay? I don't think cannabis is a drug. It's a plant. Caffeine is a drug. Okay, there is a difference there.
What about THC? Is that a drug?
It's a chemical in the plant medicine. Mm-hmm. So to me, you can take that element and turn it into a drug, similar to what they did at Oregon State University and University of Calgary, Alberta, when they're studying 3D modeling and they're creating the same chemical makeup of the THC, and I think it's THCA. Is that it, Walter?
Yeah. I mean, Jimmy, to your point is, I mean, we'll all agree. None of us want to see people driving under the influence on anything on the road. We would all agree with that. People driving while talking on the phone is a bigger problem in some respects, even with hands-free. And I think we really need not necessarily to, there's a movie that just came out, Don't Look Up. And I think what we're seeing here in the movie is about Don't Look Up because of the media coming. Yeah. I think what we're seeing being pushed by the administration is don't look up, because people will see that the sky is not falling as a result of the legalization of cannabis.
There's a lot of politics in these moves. Yeah, a lot of politics. And Jimmy, let me say this. You know, Walter, I wonder what you would think about this, but I don't even know if it's the THC that would be impairing folks. You know, we hear from people in the industry all the time about how it isn't really the THC that gets you high. It's the other things, the other terpenes, the you know, the all that stuff that's in there. And so we just really have just, you know, we're tip of iceberg here, right? And it could be that THC is more like caffeine. We just don't know. We just don't know.
You guys,
and Nick, to your point, you know, think about people that make blunts. They're not just getting high from the THC, but it's the tobacco that's really taking them to that next level.
Yeah. Oh God, I thought of a question. Of course, David, fill some time here.
Kill some time,
so I can get that question back. Oh, I got it. So we're starting to see, and Nick, you're in Colorado. And Walter, we're in Massachusetts. People buying cannabis based on the percentage of THC in that product. We're also seeing legislators trying to limit the amount of THC in the product that is legal in legal states.
Right.
And Nick, you hit it right on the head. But when you mentioned the word terpene, the terpene is the steering mechanism for all the cannabinoids in this plant, and that, again, is why limits on THC does not really explain that this strain is going to get you higher than that strain. You guys, is that not, that's not news to anybody in this show.
I think, you know, former Commissioner Flanagan, when the Cannabis Control Commission was passing regulations, one of the things she said as to why we only have the 5% limit is when she talked to other states, they felt they may have gone too high with 10%. So she figured we're better off starting off slow. You know, 5% to one person, 10% to one person is different than someone else. I mean, I don't know if it's true. There's always a story that Paul Newman drank a case of beer a day. I don't know if that's true or not.
How about Mickey Mantle?
I mean, the Boston Red Sox used to have cases of beer while they were playing. That's what
about Ronald Reagan and his glass of red wine.
Yeah.
Right. So guys, again, it comes back to responsible use of these products, correct?
Yes.
Sure. 100%.
And the only way you're going to know is if you try them. And David, you made this point about being at home where you know, you can still get in trouble being at home. I just want to say, if you take too many edibles, because, you know, I lost a day once, but you know, we all have to go through this. We're all personal guinea pigs in this. Trying out what's going to work, what's not.
Start slow.
Well, no, actually, a great point. Start slow, start low and go slow is the mantra that our 5:30 guest taught me years ago, Sherri Tutkus, the green nurse. And we'll be talking a little bit about that with her as well. But I guess my question to you guys is, what will we see challenged in the law regarding cannabis at some point? Everything? Or is it going to be limits of THC? Is it going to be what you did under the influence of THC? Where do you think we're going to go legally as far as things getting challenged down the road? Because, you know, Colorado, is it 11 years now, Nick? 12 years?
Yeah, well, it went adult use in 14, and then we were medical in 10 or 8, I can't remember.
Yep.
But yeah.
and you're learning about the impacts of what happens in a legal environment. And one of the interesting studies that I've seen out of Colorado is that actually teen use has gone down in Colorado.
Everything's gotten better. The sky has not fallen, and the economy has just gone gangbusters when many other economies didn't. And there really hasn't been any bad side effects that you can really point to. And there's been a lot of effort to create press around bad side effects. A lot of focus on folks trying to perpetuate what I would call the lie about marijuana. And that is really silenced here in Colorado now too. You just don't hear that stuff anymore.
I think, Jimmy, to your point, alcohol was legalized in 1934. Lawyers today are still testing everything about the impairment of alcohol. The test, blood alcohol test, everything being done. It's still being tested. Everything is being tested. This is so new. The system, it will work its way through the system. And a lawyer will test anything if they can. And that's what the law is about, to protect an individual's rights. To pass legislation that takes that away, first of all, is unconstitutional. And second of all, it's just not right.
David, I'm going to guess that you're familiar with what happened to Curaleaf and with the human error.
We were surprised. Yes. And I was actually surprised to read that Curaleaf settled that. They managed to put THC into some gummies that were supposed to be CBD. Somebody died from it who had COVID. So whether they really died from THC would be interesting in light of the fact that the Nixon administration did an exhaustive study for a year and they could never find anybody who OD'd on cannabis. But to much to Curaleaf's credit, they settled all the lawsuits.
All right. Now I'm going to correct you. They did not settle the wrongful death lawsuit, which is what you're talking about.
Oh, okay.
That is still pending. Nick, I'm guessing you're familiar with that, at least the news part of it, right?
Yeah.
And that was human error.
That's negligence, right? That's negligence.
Right.
I mean, that shouldn't bode badly on cannabis, right? That's a problem with a company doing the wrong thing. And like you said, Jimmy, who knows what really killed that person? And David, I think you're right. I don't think marijuana doesn't kill you. Unlike many other drugs, you can eat, smoke, vape, whatever you want to do with as much marijuana as you want. You can fill a whole room up, just waddle in it all day long, and I think you're going to be fine. You people might not want to hang out with you, but I think you're going to be okay.
I do think that there's still some challenges with people who do overdo it. Hey, look, moderation is the key. I think we know education is the key.
Jimmy, you're worried about that word waddle, aren't you?
I haven't done any waddling in a long time. I'll tell you that right now, for the most part, although there was that time with I mistakenly took 2 25 milligram edibles, thinking they were both 5 milligram edibles. And I lost a day the next day. I just said, I cannot function. I know I screwed up and I know how to handle it. And, the best way to handle it is drink lots of water. Don't believe in the black peppercorn thing. I mean, you guys are laughing, right?
Do you just chew on them, or what's the rumor on that?
Supposed to chew on black peppercorns. But here's a little chemistry lesson. And if we had a scientist on, they would back me up on this. THC and CBD are the two main or the most well-known cannabinoids in this plant. What you don't understand is that the CBD actually works as a braking mechanism for the high. So when I lost my dabbing virginity at the Freedom Rally back in 2018, they had standby 50 milligram CBD only brownies for me. Now, I did not need one. Okay. I want to just say I was able to waddle back to the booth and then move on from there. But the point is that those two work together. And that's why a lot of the strains that are certainly on the medicinal side are 1-to-1 ratio. Sometimes you can get a 4 times CBD to 1 part THC tincture. I know that Rev Clinics carries that because I've used it, and actually was asked. My doctor wanted me to try that to see if that would help my focus. David, has it helped my focus?
Jimmy, to that point, I mean, the distinction on that is it's not going to hide your high.
Right.
Versus, I'll give you an example is, you have a lot of kids going out and drinking rum and Red Bull, drinking vodka and Red Bull. You have a depressant and you have an energy drink. It's masking the alcohol high, the depressant, in a serious issue. We're talking something totally different. You're talking something totally different here. And I think that's the part that gets scary, is that everyone's talking in law enforcement, but they really don't, there's still a lot of science to learn.
Right.
Hey, Walter, let me ask you, do you mean that it's not masking the high in the case of CBD, but rather it's actually reducing the high?
That's what I'm asking Jimmy. Does it mask the high? Does it reduce the high?
It supposedly reduces the intoxicating effects of THC. Now, if we're going to use my own personal example, and you guys know I kid about this all the time, I'm leaving my body to science with a list of all the shit I put in it. Okay, so the point is, the one time that I found myself getting to a level that I was not comfortable, I decided to take straight CBD, thinking it would bring me down to an area of reality that I could actually function. And it had the opposite effect, because there's still 0.3% THC in most full spectrum CBD bottles. They are, right?
Well,
So-
and I would be, Jimmy, I just want to say there are so many things other than getting high that marijuana will prove. And when I say marijuana, I'm talking about hemp as well, that will prove valuable for. The cosmetics industry is just exploding with CBD. It's an incredible skincare product. There's a new brand that just launched here called Bisa Body Care that's amazing, that I was just looking at. I had a little one of those body rub things, and there's just a lot of really good effects that are not getting high. And we're going to just see more and more and more and more of that as the industry matures.
Yeah,
very much so.
Yep. David, and again, I want to bring you in. Where do you think the future is, in hemp or in cannabis sativa with the THC? It's a financial question, so I'm asking.
Personal consumption?
No, I'm talking about who's going to make what's going to be the biggest dollar making market, the hemp market or the cannabis sativa market with THC?
I wouldn't bet on that, Jimmy, because if you're talking about personal consumption, THC, people like their sin, so to speak.
Yeah, but I'm talking about economy. I'm talking about,
I'm trying to answer, Jimmy. I'm doing my best.
Okay, go ahead.
David, it's a trick question. It's a
What's
trick
that?
question. David, it's a trick question. Hemp is sativa.
Right. But the hemp that was passed as a legal commodity by the Farm Bill in 2018, limit 0.3% THC, versus the high quality THC that we're seeing in a lot of the cannabis now. So because hemp to me has so many more uses, every single person that I've asked in the industry says it's the hemp industry that has the biggest upside. Nick, yes?
Sure.
Yeah, think of the Republicans in 2018. No, but just for purposes of hemp, they pushed to get it to be declassified because it has an incredible opportunity for the farmlands on the South.
Right.
It's an incredible plant.
It's a cash crop.
So much more clothes. Think about everything it can be used for. Both
it will revolutionize many industries, including the construction materials industry, the healthcare industry, the beauty industry, the clothing industry, all these things. I mean, all those industries, let's not forget why marijuana was illegal in the first place. It was because it was such a threat to cotton and lumber, right? And so it still is that great product that performs so much better than those other products. And that we'll get there. We'll get there.
It was a threat, but it was funded by the champions of so-called industry, Mr. Hearst, Mr. DuPont, and they were the ones behind the creation of the DEA. Right, David?
Yes, Jimmy.
And think of some of those chemicals that were created as a result, and how and where we are today with those asbestos.
That's right. Right. That's right. All right. Hey guys, Nick Richards for Greenspoon Marder. I miss you, man. I definitely would love to be on your calendar,
Jimmy, it was great to see you in Las Vegas and great to be working with you again.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And looking forward to continuing that. Walter, always a pleasure to see you. We have more to talk about, as you know, Walter Sullivan. That being said, if either one of you wants to hang out with Sherri Tutkus, the green nurse who's coming on at 5:30, we're giving you an invite. This is one of the things David usually does too. So I want to tell him that I respect that. So I'm extending an invite to either of you. If you'd like to hang out with the green nurse, Sherri Tutkus, you are invited.
I will need to leave.
Okay, fair enough. Otherwise, have a great, good new year to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to take a break and we're going to come back with the green nurse, Sherri Tutkus. Don't go away.
Difference is building a solution for that individual, not just a custom, here's a box, here's a video, here's how you make your VMS. We custom design and custom build every situation for exactly what the customer needs. And we keep the cost low. We have multiple tiers, as far as what you're looking at on the cost side of things. If you want a one-time, where you just pay one initial cost, we have that. If you want to maintain your system and have the highest protection and highest capabilities and highest upgrades at all times, we have different plans for you. But we scale it so it's scalable and affordable 100%.
That's Liz Grow, Pro Cannabis Media's newest show host for a new show, Calling All Growers with Liz Grow. Liz is a High Times TV personality who'll be joining our talk show program starting in February.
I picture a company that stands the test of time.
Stopping at nothing to meet the people who are growing this plant generation after generation.
Calling All Growers will be more than just another interview and talk show, especially if you subscribe to the Calling All Growers workshop and webinar. That's 2 weeks after the live talk show on the same growing network, Pro Cannabis Media and PCM TV.
This is a show about interviewing the top growers in the game. It's a platform where they can share tips, tricks, and secrets for those growers coming up. Cultivators are some of my favorite people in the world, and I can't wait to talk to some of these growers.
It all starts on Wednesday, February 9th, live at 8 p.m. Eastern on PCM TV, on Roku, Apple, and ProCannabisMedia.com. Subscription-only workshops 2 weeks later on the 23rd. Sign up today to hold your spot.
What's your favorite strain?
Free. If you're a grower or interested in learning more, tune in or...
You're missing out. Calling All Growers with Liz Grow.
The Tanzanian cheetah can run upwards of 80 miles per hour. Relying on keen eyesight, the cheetah hunts during the day. Here we see a cheetah driving down the desert road smoking a joint. What have I done? Now he's getting a DUI from the cheetah police, which means he'll have to go to cheetah court, pay up to 10,000 cheetah dollars, and probably end up in cheetah jail. Don't be like the Tanzanian cheetah.
Welcome back. Thanks for hanging with us. We're back again live for the continuation of our final segment here in the Green Rush.
I'm David. I'm not David Rabinovitz. It's really important that you say, I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, or I'm David Rabinovitz, the host of Green Rush Live, right?
I'm Jimmy Young, folks. I'm the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, and I'm here with myself, David Rabinovitz, the host of the Green Rush.
All right. And by the way, someone who understands the importance of identifying yourself on camera at the beginning of a show and at the end of the show is one of our favorites of all time, the green nurse herself, Sherri Tutkus. Sherri, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor, Jimmy, to be invited onto your show. We go a long way, and providing education and content and real world evidence and what's going on in the world of cannabis has always been a pleasure to work with you. So I'm very honored that you had me on tonight. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your contributions to our cause and to our network, as always. Sherri, I'm going to ask you about the Oregon State research study first. Was that surprising, not surprising, first of all? And does it prove anything at all as far as its relationship to this horrific COVID virus that's out there?
Well, it just shows that we definitely are on the right track when it comes to research. It shows that we definitely have a lot more research to do. And the reason why is because when you're doing research, there's a lot of different ways to research. You're looking at meta-analysis, which is looking at papers. There's lab research. There's human clinical research. So you're looking at research in petri dishes versus research in animals versus research in humans. So when you look at all of that, it's very different. And so, we're in the evolutionary times of research when it comes to cannabis as medicine and all the other factors that are involved in it. So we're in the right step in the right direction. But from my personal experience as being a cannabis nurse in the space, been a registered nurse for over 33 years, and the research and the content and the education and the 4,000 patients we've taken care of, in my experience, no, I'm not surprised. I am not surprised at all. This is, we're peeling back layers and layers of, misinformation. And, we're starting to really get to the meat and potatoes of how this plant can work and how and why it's important that research continues, because the doctors that did the research in this, it wasn't funded. They did the research anyways, right? Because there is a curiosity and there's compelling evidence. There is much more real world evidence and anecdotal evidence that is out in the world today when it comes to cannabis as medicine. And so that's what we should be studying, right? And so we're hearing these things over and over and over again. And so I'm really, really glad that the researchers in Oregon actually did take the step and do the research regardless of the funding. It's a really good step in the right direction. And the research really is very promising, because when you think about cannabis as a medicine and all the benefits that it has and what these plant phytocannabinoid acidic forms of the plant were able to do, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. But I'm definitely not surprised, but I'm very, very excited in the direction that we're going.
And something we talk about all the time, David, for fun and also seriously, the importance of research and learning more and more and more about this plant, right?
Yeah.
David?
Absolutely.
David? He's just toying with me now. Now he's just toying with me. He says, I'm not going to say anything, especially if he calls on me. I'm not going to say anything. Anyway, let's go back to Sherri. Are you familiar with Dr. Jody Gilman by chance?
I am familiar with her, but I have not studied with her, and I'm familiar with her name. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's associate professor at Harvard Med and investigator in the Center for Addiction Medicine.
Mm-hmm.
She's come up with a breathalyzer that measures impairment from THC on an individual level, which is what everybody's kind of been looking for.
Okay, so I'm going to stop really quickly.
Go ahead.
How do you measure impairment from a breathalyzer? Because impairment revolves around us doing activities besides breathing. I'm just curious how, because when we're looking at measuring things, we're looking at measuring a lot of different factors. So measuring impairment is really truly about people's actions and what they're doing or not doing, right? So how does a breathalyzer measure that?
I'm going to interrupt, and I'm just going to make sure you understand. This breathalyzer is tied to measuring the levels of neural activity in the prefrontal cortex of the brain.
Right. Decision-making processes. Exactly. Right. That's very, very important. Mm-hmm.
So does that explain that if I happen to be behind the wheel of a car and I happen to be under the influence of cannabis, I'll miss my exit?
No.
Okay.
Because when we understand the endocannabinoid system,
okay,
this is the part that people don't understand. We have an endocannabinoid system not because of the cannabis plant, but because we create components in our body like the plant. And this is a big shoe drop. And when I'm educating, people are like, so when you understand the endocannabinoid system, we produce internal endogenous cannabinoids upon demand to regulate our entire body. The plant makes THC, we make a molecule called anandamide. The molecular structure is very, very similar. And it plugs into the endocannabinoid system and unlocks the door to a cascade of events. In the neurotransmitter signaling systems, the endocannabinoid system releases these molecules to give messages to tell all of our 11 organ systems, our immune system, and all of the neurotransmitter signaling systems, giving them messages to either do something or not do something. So if we're not making enough of our own internal endogenous cannabinoids, what happens is messages don't get to the neurotransmitters. They don't get to different areas of our brain, right? And so we're looking at this plant as a pleiotropic, meaning that it is working on multiple different physiological systems all at the exact same time. So the interesting thing when we're talking about, there's really a lot of issues about public legal policy pitting science, legal policy against science, right? So you think about detection procedures for cannabis impaired drivers, using blood level THC levels to gauge impairment. We really should be relying on scientific evidence, and we're currently not. So there's a ton of unacknowledged research gaps. And so what we really need to be looking at is what is the scientific, systematic, and date-driven evidence that cannabis is linked to motor vehicle crashes, right? How does the pharmacokinetic profile, okay, so pharmacokinetic profile is how it gets metabolized in the body differently, of THC differ from that of alcohol, right? How is THC and alcohol move through the body? And they move through the body very, very differently, right? And that's another thing to look at. What are the trends in cannabis-related motor vehicle crashes? For example, monitoring trends and all the factors that are associated with car accidents. What are the variables? So you need to look at more than just what someone's in their body. Their age, their cognition, their medical diagnoses, the other medications that may have been on, their sleep status, their nutrition status, their hydration status. So we need to be looking at all of these other variables. And to what extent does cannabis impair driving related behaviors and cognitive processes? Like which behaviors and abilities are most effective? And to what extent following an acute cannabis dose, right? How do we assess cannabis impaired drivers at the roadside? There's another thing to think about. How valid is it to use simulated driving research methods to make conclusions about the effects of cannabis on real world driving ability? Finally, does cannabis impair both virtual and actual on-road driving ability? Right? And so how do profiles different between alcohol consumption and THC consumption when we're talking about driving impairment? And there's a couple of other questions that are just really important too. Is cannabis impairment related temporarily to cannabis dose or to blood levels of THC and its metabolites? And then, what is the time course of cannabis related driving impairment? And can we detect cannabis impaired drivers on the roadside reliably? And what is the validity of THC blood levels limits detecting these impaired drivers? Right. And the most important thing is we need to look, like I said, at the other variables. Are alcohol and cannabis combinations more impairing, synergistic than either substance used alone? So these are really, really important factors to consider when we start to think about, cannabis and impairment and driving capabilities. I'm going to mention a research study. I'm going to pause for a minute to let you talk because I know I can keep talking, but there's a couple of research studies I want to bring up. But I'll pause for a minute.
And you know me so well that I can talk. David, how about you? David, he's muted himself now. So now he's not, he can't even talk. He can't even move his mouth and make sounds because it doesn't matter. See?
I had a lot of background noise, Jimmy, so I decided it would be wise to mute myself during that.
I appreciate that. What did you heard Sherri pontificate a little bit about these research studies? Did anything she say surprise you, or does it just reinforce everything we've been talking about?
I think more, Jimmy, it reinforces what we've talked about. I mean, it's going to be terribly difficult to come up with an easy way to spot impairment. It's not like alcohol where it leaves the body, right? So you got residue in the body. checking chemically is going to be terribly difficult. So now you have to get that out of the way. It's going to come down to conduct and the ability to perform, which is,
I agree.
Right now that becomes, take a novice like me, right, versus somebody who's I'll give you two names that you know well, Jimmy, me and Ben. Ben's been in his mid-20s. He's a professional, but he's been smoking since he was a teenager, right? He's got a much higher tolerance level than I do, even though I probably weigh 1.5 times what he weighs, right? It's going to come down to how do you function, which to a degree that may be the right test, right? If we have plenty of cameras now all in motor vehicles at traffic lights. So you've got an officer that comes up behind a motor vehicle, the camera's on, they can see whether the car is weaving or not or acting erratically. I think that becomes the de facto standard. They now walk over to the car. We decriminalized marijuana in Massachusetts in 2008, and I believe it was in September of 2009, the state Supreme Court, the Supreme Judicial Court, ruled the scent of marijuana was no longer probable cause. But if you pulled somebody over for a verifiable reason, they're driving erratically, cars swerving a little bit on the road, and now you smell marijuana within the car, that's a different issue because it's now a moving motor vehicle. We have open container laws. Beth and I went to a retail dispensary a week ago, last Sunday, picked up some goods, and interesting, the bud tender, as he put everything in the bag, he said, look, do not open any of these containers and break the seal, because technically, once you've broken that seal, you now have an open container in the vehicle. Right. So imagine you decide you're going to make some pot brownies to bring them to a friend's house. You better put them in the trunk of your car.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be terribly difficult for law enforcement and the government to come up with a meaningful way to identify impaired driving beyond the judgment of the officer who happens to witness it. And I think if they're properly trained and they've got cameras on, it's going to be so much easier, right? The car's weaving back and forth. Well, we came up to the car, we smell weed, you've got an open container. Doesn't matter that you were texting on your phone and that's why you're weaving.
Right.
The smell of weed inside the car with an open container.
Yeah. So here's an interesting thing too. I'm gonna pull up one of my studies here because I think it's pretty fascinating. And I'm gonna talk specifically for medical cannabis patients. Okay. So medical cannabis patients, the majority of them do not want to feel horrible. They don't want to be impaired. They want to feel good. They're looking to use cannabis to relieve symptoms and to improve their quality of life so they can live a good quality of life. So this was a study that was done on Sativex, which is half THC and half CBD. The study was done over 6 weeks. It was done on multiple sclerosis patients. And MS is an autoimmune and neurodegenerative disorder that impacts the brain and spinal cord. And it makes up the central nervous system and controls everything that we do. So what happens in MS is the immune system attacks the brain and the spinal cord, and it causes unpredictable symptoms. Think about this: numbness and tingling in extremities, mood changes, memory problems, pain, fatigue, blindness and paralysis, and spasticity, muscle spasming. So you think about these patients, it's been researched and substantiated that a lot of these patients have a clinical endocannabinoid deficiency, meaning that they're not producing enough of their own internal endogenous cannabinoids. Cannabis has been studied, researched, and substantiated to be very beneficial for patients that have MS. So they did this study over 6 weeks. There were 33 MS patients with severe MS. And they did 5 driving test procedures from a validated computerized test battery and evaluated the driving ability of these participants. The tests were performed on these patients at baseline and at 6 weeks of treatment using Sativex regularly and daily, which is the combination of CBD and THC in an oral spray. So this is the interesting findings. 2 of the patients who went from unfit driving became fit to drive after taking cannabis for 6 weeks. Okay, that's huge. So 2 unfit drivers started using cannabis, and at the end of 6 weeks, they were well enough to drive.
Right.
Conclusions of the study were treatment of MS patients with Sativex does not negatively impact on driving ability and may improve moderate to severe treatment resistant MS spasticity.
Yeah.
So that's,
it always helped me focus. I hyper focus when I'm in the car and under the influence, because I'll admit it, because I have.
Yeah. So, and well, the interesting thing too is, you think about, a lot of what we hear nowadays is the combining of alcohol and cannabis.
Right.
And so I actually did a podcast on this, and I did do some research on it. So the DARE class taught us that when taken together, when you take cannabis and alcohol together, that it doubles the effects of one another. But there's actually no real evidence of this. However, the research does indicate that the two substances do augment the effects of one another. So for example, in 2015, a clinical trial found that the test subjects had significantly higher blood THC levels when they used cannabis along with alcohol, and combining the two together definitely led to increased impairment. In that same study, the researchers found that the amount of alcohol, as the amount of alcohol increased, so did the THC level. So someone could have been consuming cannabis, but when they started drinking, the THC level went up in their blood. So these findings mirror those of a study in 2021 trial in which the subjects who consumed cannabis reported more levels of euphoria and had higher plasma THC levels. So when we're talking about this, and so when I was doing the research on this, what I wanted to know is, does it matter if you consume alcohol first or if you consume cannabis first? And the answer is yes, it does. So the 2021 study found that when cannabis was first used, there was a tendency to consume less alcohol and more cannabis.
Right.
And the researchers stated that using cannabis first within a co-use day was associated with lower daily alcohol consumption, but overall their cannabis consumption did increase. And then the researchers suggested that the use of a substance in a particular order was not linked to consequences, but the number of drinks consumed was the predictor of whether or not a person would be more likely to experience side effects. So the other thing that's really interesting too, that I always like to talk about when it comes to alcohol and cannabis and the difference, okay, when you break it down physiologically, if you look at all 11 organ systems and all of the neurotransmitter signaling systems, and you compare the effects, alcohol is toxic to all 11 organ systems, our immune system, and all of the neurotransmitter signaling systems. There is not one good thing about alcohol. And that whole wine thing, oh, if I drink a glass of wine, I'm sorry, but you can get resveratrol, you can get grapeseed extract, you can get your oligomeric proanthocyanidins and your OPCs that people generally think they get from wine from supplements, right? And so when it comes to cannabis, cannabinoids support all 11 organ systems, our immune system, and all the neurotransmitter signaling systems that give messages to our body to either do something or not do something. So in the event of acute alcohol consumption, what happens is that the body gets scared, and it leads the body to start producing more receptors in the brain, actually looking for our own anandamide molecule as a protective mechanism to protect the brain and other systems. Right? So chronic overtime alcohol dependence is also linked to the downregulation, meaning we don't produce enough of our own anandamide bliss-like molecule. And long-term alcohol use depletes endocannabinoid tone, which means if your endocannabinoid system is not functioning optimally, that's when you're going to start to see problems. Things are starting to fall apart. Right? And so this has an adverse effect on all of our organ systems and physiological processes. And so, the bottom line is, impairment. And when we're looking at, different clients and patients that have come to us for consultations, we have found that cannabis has significantly decreased the amount of substances that are harmful for people that are taking over time, decreased amount of pharmaceuticals, decreased dosing of pharmaceuticals, people coming off of alcohol, people coming off of other opiates and other drugs that aren't so healthy. So
all right, now we both have a friend, Dr. Jordan Tischler.
Oh yeah.
When he came on my show back in 2019 or 2018, the very beginning of the In the Weeds podcast, he said it's an 8-time catalyst. If you walk in, if you're going in for alcohol, and let's say you've had 2 or 3 drinks, okay, maybe you don't feel drunk, but you are certainly intoxicated. and then you go outside and you take a few puffs off a
Yes.
joint, you're
Mhm.
going to be 8 times
Yes.
higher.
I
8
agree.
times more intoxicated.
Yes.
Is that accurate? Is it? You said double. This is 8 times. Yes.
Double, 8 times, regardless. Yes.
Right.
Your impairment and intoxication does significantly jump when you are consuming alcohol first and then use cannabis.
Right. And then the other side of the
Opposite.
coin, obviously, if you're really high and you go into a bar, you can sip a drink for probably 3 or 4 hours.
Exactly.
Right. And
You're most likely going to order bar food.
Yes. There certainly is that too. Any insight at all on, we get in trouble a lot of times when we talk about this virus that's impacted our lives and turned them upside down the last couple of years. So we got to be careful and we want to balance the information. But is there something about this SARS-based virus that that supports, even in theory, what the Oregon State researchers found in a lab?
Yeah. So here's the thing. So when you think about, I'm going to explain what an antioxidant is. Okay.
Okay, good.
So cannabinoids are antioxidants, and it's going to be very, very comparable. So imagine you have this spiked protein, right, that wants to enter into a cell.
Right.
Okay. It's going to try to get in there no matter what. So think about an apple. Okay. And when we peel an apple, take 2 apples and we're going to peel them and we're going to put them on the counter. We're going to cover one with lemon juice, which is an antioxidant. And we're going to leave another one open to air. The antioxidant that's covering the apple is protecting it. So if you go away and walk away for an hour and you come back and you take a peek at the apples that have been exposed to air, the one that is covered in lemon juice will remain white and pristine and looking beautifully fresh because it's protected, being protected from oxidative stress. The apple that's exposed to air is going to be brown. It's going to start, I call it, it's rusting, right? So very similar, you think about the antioxidant properties of these cannabinoids that are going around and they're actually blocking, attaching on, and preventing that virus from getting in. And if you're also consuming other cannabinoids, you think about this, the cannabinoids are also protecting our cells, right? Protecting our own cells. Cannabinoids are antioxidants, anti-inflammatory agents, antidepressants, anti-anxiety, you name it, immunomodulatory, anti-cancer, anti-proliferative, anti-medicine. I mean, you can just go on and on and on because it acts as a pleiotropic. When we talk about the endocannabinoid system, I always remind people that it is an entire system that regulates our entire body. So imagine your endocannabinoid system's blanketing. You have receptors on all of your organ systems, every single organ. You have these cannabinoid receptors, and we even have receptors inside of our cells they're starting to discover. And then at the neurotransmitter signaling junction site. So I'm actually, when it comes to, I'm concerned more about people that are cannabinoid deficient, because if you do not make enough of your own, you're set up. You're set up. And the endocannabinoid system and cannabinoids are adaptogens and help our body to adapt to stress coming from outside in. We build this internal, rich, resilient body that's filled with phytobotanical nutrients and all of the other tools that we teach and educate on. And our bodies has a better chance of fighting off infection for sure.
Well, you are the start low, go slow green nurse. It's the mantra you were preaching for years. We actually had one of our attorneys talking about that same thing earlier on this show. And Sherri, I always learn stuff from you. And you do have a really good ability, a great ability to use the right kind of analogies so laymen can understand. When I start looking at the Oregon State study and they start talking about the molecular, makeup of this one and that one and using these words that are like, 50-cent words, right over my head. I'm just not a science guy, never have played one on TV either. So it is what it is. And I always enjoy chatting with you officially and unofficially, because I always seem to take away another good analogy. I learned something, and I always feel much better about the future and where we're at. So Sherri Tutkus, the green nurse, give a plug. Where can people find you?
Oh, goodness. So the Green Nurse has merged with Holistic Caring Network out in San Diego on the West Coast.
Great.
And we also just merged with Canum in Australia. So we are we've created an ecosystem and a global platform for education. We are educating patients and providers across the globe. We also just started a nonprofit called Holistic Caring Inc. And what we're doing is we are providing free nurse line services for patients, which is really, really going to be amazing for so many different people. And we've created our Green Nurse approved marketplace. So what we're doing as nurses is we are taking upon ourselves to vet different products and services, going through a very, very stringent process, our own testing on the side, and we're having pharmacists and other physicians besides nurses evaluate these products. So really, really exciting. So www.holisticcaring.com. And we do provide services for patients. We teach and educate on the endocannabinoid system, help patients get access to medicines, help them choose at dispensaries, get them hooked up with good CBD products. And then for providers, for nurses, what we're doing is we're educating nurses and we're teaching them. We have professional pathways for nurses to get into the cannabis space. And then we're offering them jobs because we are hiring, which is going to be great. We're creating, industry professionals. And then on the other side, we do media, which is so cool too. So the media that we do, the Green Nurse podcast, is kind of taking another twist this year. So besides the guests that we're having on, is we're going to do a podcast with the guests to share their compelling story of healing and what brought them into the space. But then we're going to bring them back for a webinar. And so we're going to do live online webinars, bringing education to the forefront so we can really connect the dots. So patients and people across the globe can connect the dots to the different providers and what they have to offer to patients. So it's really, really exciting. And one last plug. Real quick, we're going to start shooting High Science in March. Cheers.
Excellent. Very good. Hey, Sherri Tutkus, you are a bright light in so many ways. And I'm so glad that we've maintained our friendship over the years. And
me too, Jimmy.
I hope Pro Cannabis Media is Green Nurse certified.
Green Nurse approved. And you know what? We're very honored that you have us on your Roku platform. Really, really honored. We are going to be continuing to create amazing content for people, really, really connecting the dots. We're becoming globally accredited, and we're actually training health professionals across the globe. Fantastic. So we're very excited to be able to bring that to Pro Cannabis Media in your channel on Roku. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. And you're welcome anytime. David, do you have any final thoughts?
It's been a great show, Jimmy. Sherri, you were a great guest for the final 30 minutes. I'm looking at the chat comments, and I think you were by far and away the most popular segment we did. So thank you.
Thank you. And for, I need to get a copy of this so I can share it to our platform. We've got tons of patients that would love to see this. So I'll make sure we share this.
It's all about sharing, and subscribing. That's it. Pretty much it. Lord knows, Sherri, I like you. I'm ready to share you, and I'm always a subscriber. Okay, so there you go. So for David Rabinovitz, for Dan French, our director, Isabel Turner, our producer, and our special guest, Sherri Tutkus, and all of our guests here on Pro Cannabis Media, we thank you for watching Green Rush Live. We'll be back again next Friday at 4 p.m. Stay tuned to this week's We Talk News, and following We Talk News, the debut of a new show called the American Cannabis Report with Christopher Smith, who happens to be our California correspondent. So, like I say every week, remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Coming up on We Talk News this week, Oregon State researchers have discovered that some cannabinoids created in a lab just might be able to impact COVID's growth. But don't bogart that joint just yet. Research is not reality. We'll talk with our medical director, Dr. Mary Clifton. Plus, Germany prepares for their cannabis market to launch, and California continues to make tax adjustments in the nation's largest market for weed. And one of the nation's first legal states, Washington, lays down the law on Delta 8. All that and more on We Talk News with Elena Pinto, next on PCM TV and Pro Cannabis Media.
Pro Cannabis Media programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry. And by Artery Pay, easy, cheap, fun, and legal, just like cannabis should be.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elena Pinto for Pro Cannabis Media, and welcome to this week's episode of Weed Talk News. Our top story this week is the one on everyone's lips, including just about every media outlet in the world. A new study from researchers at Oregon State University found specific compounds in cannabis may be able to prevent COVID-19 from entering cells. This headline spread across the internet like wildfire, with stoners everywhere taking to social media to share the same "looks like this is why I haven't caught COVID" joke. But if you read the study, you'll find the researchers found no benefits from smoking weed. Instead, the magic is in some of the other cannabinoids we don't always talk about. Our medical director, Dr. Mary Clifton, explains that this study has nothing to do with the impact of smoking weed, but rather how researchers stumble upon medical marvels in the lab.
We're accumulating quite a bit of research in the laboratory, not really in the human model, but in the laboratory that talks about the immune modulating effects of cannabis. And so what I really want people to hear from this study is that there are components that we have known for a long time that modulate the immune system and help with an adequate and appropriate immune response when you're using cannabis. But what companies do when they're trying to design a product is they take, a molecule of interest and then look at all of the molecules around that molecule of interest and start to study them. They, run inflammatory mediator markers. They run markers for, blood counts in case it may help with anemia. They'll run markers for all kinds of conditions that they think that molecule might work on. And then they have a result like this, where this particular molecule appears to have a specific benefit. But you don't need to race to the internet and find a producer for this exact molecule. What the best thing to do is to continue to consume the whole plant. Continue to use the flower or use an edible that's made from a full spectrum plant so that you can get some of this product along with what we just have to assume are a whole bunch of other really good compounds for you in the whole flower.
Those compounds are infinite throughout the cannabis plant, more than 300 that we know of so far. And we already know the impact of some of those cannabinoids have on their own, and we're starting to understand how those specific elements of the plant can have an impact on the way our body experiences its benefits.
A lot of that has to do with the presence or absence of different minor cannabinoids. And now we've identified, with some certainty that there are some other minor cannabinoids that work particularly well to help you to not get infected.
If anything, this study gives merit to the reasons why scientists should be able to study the whole plant under federal law with fewer restrictions. Some new national and state surveys on cannabis show large support for medical or recreational legalization, but that's not exactly how the findings of the polls from Emerson College are being presented. Vote Pro Podcast's Phil Adams reports from Washington, D.C.
Hi, I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, and this is the Weed Talk News DC report. A national survey by a group opposed to legalization finds that a large majority of Americans favor legalizing cannabis. The poll, funded by prohibitionist group Smart Approaches to Marijuana, asked respondents to express their preferences among 4 options. Full adult use legalization was preferred by a plurality of 38%, followed by legalization for medical use at 30%. 19% favored decriminalization, and full prohibition was the choice of only 14%. SAM then presented its findings by juxtaposing full legalization against the combination of the other three, quote, non-legalization options. The effect was to make it appear as if proponents of legalization were in the minority. In a press release, SAM President Kevin Sabet said their poll shows public support for legalization to be, quote, a false narrative. However, the fact that medical cannabis is a form of legalization means that fully 68% of respondents to the SAM poll actually preferred some form of legalization. This latter figure is in line with numerous other surveys, including a November 2021 Gallup poll, which also found 68% of Americans supporting cannabis legalization. Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, said in an internal memo that a history of recreational cannabis use should not automatically disqualify an applicant for security clearance. In the document issued last month, the DNI offered clarification on several topics involving security clearances and the legalization of recreational marijuana in several states. The memo emphasizes that cannabis use remains federally illegal, but notes that past recreational use, quote, should not be determinative in making adjudicative decisions. Virginia lawmakers remain divided on what, if anything, to do about the 10 people still serving prison terms for cannabis convictions. When Virginia legalized adult use of cannabis last year, the question of resentencing provisions was left unresolved. According to the Virginia Department of Corrections, all 10 are scheduled to be released within the next 6 years. Another 560 people are serving sentences only partially related to marijuana, having also been convicted of more serious offenses. With the GOP now holding the governor's mansion and a slim majority in the House of Delegates, Republicans have not tipped their hands about how they plan to approach the issue, aside from offering their assurances that they will not seek to repeal legalization. That's the Weed Talk news from inside the Beltway for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
The renewed surge of the coronavirus is taking its toll on people, but the supply chain issues stemming from the beginning pandemic are now hitting cannabis suppliers even harder. Many businesses already facing labor shortages and high taxes are now having to reassess and revamp operational strategy due to costs impacted by the supply chain. Harris Supply, one of the world's largest distributors of pre-rolls, saw its container shipping costs jump from $3,000 to $25,000, an increase of 773%. This could mean that certain products on your dispensary shelf may be pricey for some time to come. For more happening this week, Deborah Borchardt has our Green Market Report.
I'm Deborah Borchardt, and this is the Weed Talk News Business Update from the Green Market Report. Tilray stock jumped this week when the company turned in a solid earnings report for the second fiscal quarter, with revenue increasing about 20% to $155 million versus last year's $129 million. Hydroponic Grown Generation announced revised full-year 2021 revenue expectations of between $420 million and $422 million. That is a way better number than last year's $193 million. But the important news here was that they said that same-store sales are expected to decline in the fourth quarter by 12.3%. And that follows other hydroponic companies like Hydrofarm and Scotts Miracle-Gro that also warned of slowing sales in the fourth quarter. Finally, Leafly Holdings and the cannabis SPAC Marder Merger Corp. 1 announced that they have entered into a $30 million note agreement. But what is more important in here is that Merida postponed the member voting on the SPAC, which had originally planned to close at the end of December. Now, this is causing a lot of people to predict that the deal might not happen and could result in what is known as a de-SPACing. And this has been your business update from the Green Market Report. I'm Deborah Borchardt.
News worthy of a chef's kiss. Officials in Italy say advocates have gathered enough signatures to place a marijuana legalization referendum on the country's ballot this spring. There's a few more hurdles to get over before that vote can happen, but the marijuana movement in Europe is clearly growing. With that, let's check in with Stephen Arthur George for our European report.
I'm Stephen Arthur George with CAI Advisors in Lisbon, Portugal. This is the European Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. German government officials start talking details of legalization. The current spike in COVID cases has caused some delays, but conversations continue around adult use cannabis regulations in Germany. It's still not clear where adult use cannabis will be dispensed, and pharmacies are still in the discussion. Regardless, it sounds like there will be strict requirements for retail location staff. It does look like they will hand out some cultivation and manufacturing license as well, but the details are not yet clear. Furthermore, in Germany, Cantourage introduces Uganda flower to German patients. EU GMP is the golden standard for products entering the EU medical cannabis market and has been an obstacle for many cultivators. This week, German cannabis company Cantourage announced it would be introducing some flower into the market, which was cultivated in Uganda. This is exciting news and means more and more opportunities will open for cannabis cultivated outside of Europe to enter Europe. On that same note, St. Vincent Island cultivators prepare for first export to Europe. The government recently announced it would export its first shipment of medical cannabis to Europe. The cannabis flower is also said to be destined for Germany, Europe's largest importer of medical cannabis. The global movement of cannabis for medical purposes is growing rapidly, and Europe is becoming the target importer as regulations soften across member states. That's the European Cannabis Report. I'm Stephen Arthur George from CAI Advisors reporting for Weed Talk News.
Back in the US, a battle royale over a bill in Washington state. The state's Liquor and Cannabis Board is requesting a change to legalization that would explicitly prohibit the sale of intoxicating materials derived from hemp. That would mean no Delta 8 sales in Washington. And while some cannabis companies think it's a necessary ban, others argue it would stifle a budding industry. So industry movers will have to see how that shakes out. Josh Kincaid has the rest of our Washington report.
I'm Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Washington's new year legislative and regulatory priorities include removing the excise tax for medical patients. This will not only help patients acquire their medicine at a more reasonable cost, but it'll incentivize retailers to carry the Department of Health compliant products and incentivize producers and processors to grow and manufacture DOH compliant and medical products. Currently, patients in Washington State utilizing cannabis to help with their conditions must pay a 37% excise or sin tax on their medicine. Not only is this fundamentally wrong, but it creates several additional consequences, such as forcing patients to use cheaper products since they can't afford the higher quality and more costly items, or worse, it forces them to seek their medicine on the illicit market. Next week, you guys are going to find out about D8 and how synthesized cannabinoids appear to be among the top concerns for Washington State's Liquor and Cannabis Board, according to the Cannabis Observer. But with that, we're going to have to roll up this Washington State Cannabis Report. I'm Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge reporting for Weed Talk News. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.
The legal market in California is on the brink of some hard times. Raids continue to happen on businesses not licensed by local municipalities. And now the entire state industry seems to be revolting against the current cannabis tax structure. But Governor Gavin Newsom says he's open to rethinking the taxes the state imposes on growers and purchasers. And with more from the Golden State, here's Christopher Smith with our California report.
Hey, thanks for the intro. Here's the California Roundup for Weed Talk News. California Governor Gavin Newsom says he's going to look into fixing the mess in the largest cannabis market in the world, which is getting pummeled by a perverse origami of expensive and complex regulations, too many farms, too few retailers, and taxes that are so high they're driving growers into the ground and buyers into the arms of illicit operators. Newsom has signaled he's open to rethinking the taxes that the state levels on marijuana growers and purchases. Now, how sure am I that the Golden State does not need Cali's cannabis cash? U.S. News and World Report projects that the Sacramento skimmers are scheduled to shunt a surplus of $31 billion this year, on top of $76 billion surplus from last year. The coffers are full, Governor. Give us a break, or remember, not only do Californians buy billions in weed, they also vote. In the 20 years since Sarah Rodriguez was hit with a felony for weed, she became the first in her family to go to college, and in June graduated from UCLA with a master's degree in social welfare. But even though the 2018 legalization laws were promised to speed up the process of expungement, Rodriguez still has a felony on her record, which is a potential black mark for employers and the state social work licensing board. Rodriguez is but one of at least 34,000 marijuana records that have not been fully processed by the California courts. Some claim the slow pace stems from the stigma of reefer madness, or COVID, or the bias of the legal system, or just a lax approach to the situation because it mostly affects black and brown people. Said Sean LaFleur, an organizer with the group All of Us or None, for those 21,000 people in Riverside or 5,400 people in San Bernardino, they deserve to have their lives back. YouTuber turned pugilist Logan Paul bawled about his bummer of a new year on Instagram this week. The great white mope who now makes his living taking fists to the face complained that he'd kicked weed on Christmas Eve, but he's been having some pretty nasty withdrawals, loss of appetite, insomnia, and extreme irritability. I wonder what else could explain such symptoms to a guy with knots for knuckles who's also ahead. Maybe he should take a break from the sweet science and Google concussion to find some of the very same symptoms. And I'm Christopher Smith from the American Cannabis Report, sending California peace and Pakalolo for Weed Talk News.
New year, new rules. At least that's what the state of Florida is hoping for its medical marijuana program. With a legislative session kicking off this week, lawmakers hope to pass bipartisan reform on the medical weed. The new proposal would reduce costs for people by requiring fewer doctor's visits, allow patients to keep their registration cards for 2 years instead of 1, and give people the option to use telehealth to refill their prescriptions. Heather Allman has the rest of the week's Florida report. Heather?
From Cannabis Law Report, I'm Heather Allman with this week's Florida Report for Weed Talk News. Using over 35 years of data, Florida Polytechnic University released a new report examining highway traffic fatalities in legal cannabis states. The research team discovered that no significant changes occurred in fatal car accident trends after enactment of adult use laws. In fact, states with medical marijuana programs showed a decrease in fatal accidents. In other news, Florida Highway Patrol seized 125 pounds of cannabis stuffed in suitcases during a traffic stop for improper window tint occurring near the Jacksonville airport. A strong odor of cannabis was detected by troopers upon approaching the vehicle, and after baggage claim tickets were connected to the seized luggage, state investigators believe the marijuana was smuggled from the West Coast. 2 men were arrested and both faced felony charges of marijuana trafficking and smuggling. Also, this past week, state lawmakers returned to their chambers for the 2022 session. And sure enough, cannabis debates continue regarding THC potency limits and access to telemedicine. To the disappointment of many Floridians, the DeSantis emergency order implementing telemedicine for the state's doctors and patients has expired. However, in response to the widening gulf between public policy and reality, Republican Senator Manny Diaz is sponsoring House Bill 679 to reverse the ban on telemedicine, while 2 of his fellow representatives are still pushing for that THC potency cap. Floridians who want to make their voice count should contact their local and state representatives. That's a wrap for Florida Cannabis this week. I'm Heather Allman from Cannabis Law Report for Weed Talk News.
Arizona making big bucks off adult use cannabis sales. A new report showing that the state's legal weed sales set a new record in November, topping $60 million for the first time. In the first 11 months of 2021, both medical and adult use sales combined brought in $1.2 million. And it's not just sales growing in numbers. Last month, the state received more than 1,500 applications for social equity industry licenses. So who's to say where the boom in bud is coming from? Another state seeing sales soar is Michigan. And with that story and more from the Great Lakes, let's check in with Michigan Normal Executive Director Rick Thompson.
Hello again, everyone. This is the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News. Let's begin. Michigan's regulated market sold $1.79 billion worth of cannabis during 2021, according to Director Andrew Brisboe of the Marijuana Regulatory Agency. I interviewed him yesterday along with the cast of 420 Post, and he did have some eye-popping numbers to share. Now, these figures are for calendar 2021, not fiscal 2021, so they may vary from some other reporting on the subject. During 2021, the medical marijuana program sold $481 million, and the adult use program $1.3 billion during the calendar year. December's numbers set a record at $135 million in adult use sales, despite a 47% decrease in consumer price for an ounce of adult use cannabis year to date. Cannabis is currently being sold in 432 adult use retail centers and 458 provisioning centers for medical marijuana. The adult use industry experienced a 290% increase in the volume of adult use flower sold from January 2021 versus December 2021. While the National Law Review had nothing good to say about Public Act 55, the new law requiring cannabis businesses to become insured by in-state admitted insurers. The Law Review states the most obvious problem with SB 461 and Public Act 55 is the requirement that insurance policies may be issued only by licensed or admitted insurance companies in Michigan. Now that limits who cannabis businesses can obtain insurance from and puts restrictions on companies switching carriers. The Law Review characterizes the new law as a, quote, leap before you look decision that is likely to cause unintended problems for the state's cannabis businesses. The law is the result of bipartisan legislation originating in the Michigan Senate from May of last year. The Law Review states, and I quote, legislating insurance requirements in a highly regulated and evolving industry characterized by unknown risks should only happen when all stakeholders have been heard, end quote. When all stakeholders have been heard is the mantra we've been pushing in regards to legislation potentially affecting patients and caregivers in Michigan. Now let's hope that lesson is taken to heart. Now, how important is cannabis to America? It's now the 5th most valuable crop in the USA, and we don't even have all the states participating yet. Nationally, in the value scale, cannabis ranked behind corn, soybeans, wheat, and hay. And wheat and hay are basically grasses too, just saying. But what about the Great Lakes state? Cannabis ranks 3rd in the most lucrative cash crop ranking here in Michigan, according to a great article by Cheyenne at Graywall Law. It falls behind only corn and soybeans. Director Brisboe confirmed there are 36,000 Michigan residents employed in the cannabis industry today. Now, final story. I happen to know someone who lives and loves in the city of Grand Haven, but their mayor, Catherine McNally, is a complete idiot. Grand Haven has a medical marijuana business ordinance, but the mayor hates recreational cannabis. She hates it so much, she's willing to break the law. Now, when city council took up the issue of a recreational cannabis ordinance, they referred it to the city's planning commission, which is a typical move among cities looking into the issue. Now, that angered McNally, who wanted the issue to be dead on arrival. She was so angry that on January 3rd of this year, she asked council to put a proposal on the ballot for this May, asking the city's residents if they want recreational cannabis sales in their community. Problem is, that's not legal. Proposals can only be placed on the ballot as a result of a petition drive by the people, not because a city official has a hissy fit. Council members outed McNally as being a cannabis hater. Her comments in council records indicate she believes recreational cannabis goes against the community's value system. But during the 2018 election, 55.5% of Grand Haven citizens approved the legalization proposal we put forth, and it passed in all 4 of Grand Haven's city districts. Now, don't forget, Muskegon adult use retailers are delivering lots and lots of cannabis to Grand Haven residents. So the only thing McNally's rant is doing is preventing the success of the medical-only shops already established in her town. Now, maybe next election, 55.5% of the voters in Grand Haven will elect someone else to be mayor. Now, in the meantime, we'll keep an eye on this issue. And that's it for the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson for Weed Talk News.
The Show Me State apparently wants to be shown freedom with psychoactives. While cannabis advocates in Missouri are working to legalize the plant for adult use, the state's GOP is proposing a bill to allow for other psychedelic medical treatments. Republican Representative Michael Davis filed legislation this week to allow people with serious illnesses access to a range of psychedelics like psilocybin and LSD. A progressive showing from the Show Me State of allowing more access to its residents. Brandon Jones takes a closer look in this week's Missouri Report.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones from Distribution Maven with Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. And yeah, we can't believe it. Plants over pills, victory number 2 here in Missouri. Let's go. So yeah, we want to bring psychedelics here to see how we can help all of those people that are dealing with those illnesses that cannabis can't help. So we all know that, cannabis does a lot of help with a lot of different ailments, but psychedelics and psilocybin can definitely help with a lot of others. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about last year's sales, my first show of the year. So I appreciate everybody. Thanks for letting me come back. Missouri ended last year with 215 million in annual sales. And if you can believe it, last December jumped up to almost 29 million in sales for the year. Right now we're doing over 181 dispensaries in the state. 41 cultivation license and 58 different manufacturing sites. So Missouri is taking off, growing rapidly, and I'm very excited to see what's here to come in 22. The biggest topic for the state is recreational use. There are 2 different bills that have both been proposed and look to come up forward on the ballot in November to see how we can get recreational use passed here in Missouri as well too. One does actually include the impungement of all the people that have been incarcerated for cannabis crimes to get them instantly released as well. So that's a big thing here in Missouri that we're looking forward to, rec use. And obviously we're talking about psilocybins. So getting ready for the weekend, and the Chiefs also here in Missouri, we have a couple different places where you can actually consume. So I'm going to be at the Funky Stunk in Gladstone, taking my glasses here. If you've seen these guys, they pop right off your glasses, and have my devices with me and ready to go at a consumption party here in the state of Missouri to watch the Chiefs game this weekend. So go Chiefs, go Missouri, and let's keep cannabis going. Thanks again, Brandon Jones with Distribution Maven, the Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News.
It's been almost a year since the state of New Jersey legalized cannabis, but lawmakers still haven't given any timeline to when people will actually be able to purchase weed. Garden state law says the first day for adult use sales is supposed to happen on February 22nd. The catch is the state's Cannabis Regulatory Commission still hasn't issued any licenses. And that means even if retail approval goes on as planned right now, there won't actually be any shops selling it. 4 seed-to-sale medical dispensaries have applied to also start selling product to anyone over 21. And some, like Curaleaf, say they're ready to start sales at any moment. But when lawmakers will give the green light is anyone's guess. Sticking with the East Coast, let's check in with Claudia Post in Pennsylvania.
I'm Claudia Post from Scarlet Express, and I'm here in the Keystone State, Pennsylvania, reporting for Weed Talk News. First up, January 7th, True Leaf Cannabis opened up their 160th owned, operated, or affiliated dispensary right here in Philadelphia. That's a lot of stores, 160, wow. And last week I spoke about drug testing for non-essential employers, pardon me. Now our city council passed that law prohibiting those employers for non-essential businesses to drug test. The reason that this happened was many of the folks who use medical marijuana for their various diseases, i.e. autism, have a double whammy. They have a problem because they have an issue, And now they have a problem because, they're tested for their medicine. And now we don't have to worry about that anymore because our wonderful city council changed that law. I'm very excited. Next is Josh Shapiro, our Attorney General right here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And he is a gubernatorial hopeful. He tweeted, New York and New Jersey have legalized marijuana. In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and in Pennsylvania, the majority of Pennsylvanians support recreational marijuana legalization. In fact, 6 in 10 adults support complete legalization in the Commonwealth. So as Josh Shapiro says, let's get it done in Pennsylvania. I'm Claudia Post reporting for Weed Talk News.
In Maine, some dispensary owners are growing more worried about a saturated market. The owner of Portland Greenhouse says he was already worried about saturation when Portland first proposed rules that would have restricted the market to 20 retail licenses. Then voters passed a referendum that eliminated that cap, as well as a required buffer zone between competitors. Now, some shops are sharing walls and think 2022 will only bring in more competition. But it seems as though some businesses like Portland Greenhouse are taking the high road, looking to work alongside and with their competitors rather than against them. Traveling over to Vermont now, Jessie Lynn Dolan has this week's Green Nurse Report.
I'm Jessie Lynn Dolan from Nurse Grown Organics and Vermont Cannabis Nurses, and this is the Weed Talk News Vermont Report. It's the start of the 2022 legislative session, and Vermont's Cannabis Control Board has told lawmakers that they'll need about a dozen new staff members to properly administer the state's new retail cannabis laws. Lawmakers have also just dropped a bunch of new cannabis-related bills, leaving 6 bills currently to be addressed, covering a wide range of issues. One of the most important and carried over from last year's session was written by the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. This bill would reduce license fees for social equity applicants, establish a cannabis business development fund to provide low interest rate loans and grants to social equity applicants, and establish the community social equity program. Other bills would do things like tax cannabis wholesalers' annual gross receipts over $5 million, regulate licensed small cannabis cultivation as farming, give communities more control to assess local licensing fees, and give 60% of the cannabis excise tax revenue over to the financially strapped Vermont state college systems. The new proposed medical bill would increase plant counts, allow caregivers to support 2 patients, eliminate the requirement that caregivers be fingerprinted, and remove the necessary second sign-off for PTSD diagnoses. Vermont Senator Sears is proposing several sweeping changes, including but not limiting to amending the list of prohibited cannabis products, allowing CBD to be added to cannabis products, making solid concentrates, oils, and tinctures exempt from the 50 milligram limit per package, and prohibit dispensaries from manufacturing cannabis concentrates by chemical extraction using butane or hexane. That's the Vermont Report for Weed Talk News. I'm Vermont's cannabis nurse, Jessie Lynn Dolan.
If you live in Massachusetts, you might see a robotic bud tender on your next trip to the dispensary. Wings, an emerging robotics and AI startup, has developed an autonomous retail system that it plans to put to use at Collective Cannabis in Littleton. It's essentially a machine that's already stocked with product, allowing users to come up and order like a vending machine or pick up their product from an online order, all without ever having to go to the counter. With more from the Bay State, Ron Marshallsea has our Massachusetts report.
I'm Ron Marshallsea with the Massachusetts Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Veteran-owned C&A Stores in Amesbury was able to make a significant donation to the Veterans Northeast Outreach Center because of the waived 3% community impact fee by the mayor and town of Amesbury. The donation amounted to $116,202, and it was all to support the mission of the Outreach Center serving all of Massachusetts, including Amesbury, where the company headquarters and one of their 2 retail stores are located. Cannabis Insider Live will hold its New England virtual event on Wednesday, January 26th, with industry leaders and experts set to discuss the Massachusetts cannabis business. Set for 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. on the 26th, the event will also offer discussion on best practices among business leaders in the burgeoning industry across Massachusetts, Connecticut, and the New England region. Cannabis Insider Live said in a statement, there will also be opportunity to network with industry leaders and up-and-comers, showcase area businesses, and gather new ideas, toolkits, and roadmaps for launching and growing a successful business. Tickets for the New England virtual event are available on Cannabis Insider's website. And finally, Lantern, one of the leading on-demand cannabis e-commerce marketplace and home delivery platforms in the U.S., announced today they experienced 350% year-over-year growth. This is following the expansion of its on-demand marketplace delivery platform into Colorado and Michigan. And in July 2021, Lantern became the first adult-use delivery platform to launch in Massachusetts and serve the greater Boston area. Since then, the company has secured partnerships with numerous local dispensaries and couriers, including Sanctuary, Cultivate, Freshly Baked, Netta, Garden Remedies, INSA, and Theory Wellness. That's this week's Massachusetts Cannabis Report. For Weed Talk News, I'm Ron Marshallsea.
And finally, researchers at Massachusetts General Hospital say they've developed a non-invasive brain imaging procedure as an objective and reliable way to identify people under the influence of THC. The technique uses imaging technology to measure brain activation patterns that correlate to impairment from THC intoxication. This could have some implications for improving highway and workplace safety. And this week on Green Rush Live, our own Jimmy Young chats with John Carmichael, the police chief of Newton, Massachusetts, about just how soon the law may start testing for high drivers. But until then, that's it for this week's episode of Weed Talk News. I'm Elena Pinto. See you next time. And remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there, so use it responsibly.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
Difference is building a solution for that individual. Not just a custom, here's a box, here's a video, here's how you make your VMS. We custom design and custom build every situation for exactly what the customer needs. And we keep the cost low. We have multiple tiers, as far as what you're looking at on the cost side of things. If you want a one-time, where you just pay one initial cost, we have that. If you want to maintain your system and have the highest protection and highest capabilities and highest upgrades at all times, we have different plans for you. But we scale it so it's scalable and affordable 100%.
Welcome to the American Cannabis Report on PCM TV. I'm your host, Christopher Smith, and today I'm feeling super fortunate to have Brian Buckley, one of the founders of the Hellman Valley Growers Company. Hey, Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. It's really great to have you here. Thanks for making the time.
Oh, no, super excited about this.
I've been reading your bio on your website, and I got to tell you, it reads a little bit like a Tom Clancy novel. I'm sure a lot of people probably ask you what it's, what it takes to not only to be a Marine, but to be special ops and to do the things that you guys have all accomplished. Can you tell me a little bit about your background and about what it really takes to get to the level that you've been?
Yeah, for me, I remember I was getting recruited in high school when I was playing football to go to United States Naval Academy, and I just had no desire at all to go there. But then after the events of 9/11, I was at the University of Massachusetts playing football there. I decided it was just time for me to go earn my citizenship. So finished out the season and then transferred to Villanova University and joined the ROTC program. Was there for 2 years, had to go through officer candidate school in Quantico, Virginia. And then I received my commission and started off in the infantry, did a tour to Iraq and came back. They said, why don't you try out for Marine reconnaissance? So I tried out for that, made it, and they rewarded me by sending me right back to Iraq 6 months later. And then when I came back from that deployment, they said, we just started up a new thing with Marine Special Operations. And it was a really long time for actually the Marine Corps to go into Special Operations Command. But after the events of 9/11, the President of the United States and Secretary of Defense were like, we're not even going to ask, you're doing it. And had to go through a pretty arduous selection process where I believe it was well over 200 of us started off and about 20 or 30 of us actually made it at the end. So it was a pretty intense selection process. And it was pretty amazing. You just see the methodology they go through of how to select special operators. And from that point on, I was a team commander and did deployments into Africa, Southeast Asia, as well as Afghanistan, in particular the Helmand province, which is kind of where the whole entire birth of the company, Helmand Valley Growers Company, really derived from.
Right. And now you're the co-founders are Andy and Matt?
Correct.
Okay. And all three of you then were all at that same level?
Yes, yeah, all three of us served as Marine Raiders. So everyone's like, what is a Marine Raider? And I just tell them it's a lot like a Navy SEAL, we're just better looking.
Well, that's clear, obviously. Anyone can see that. And I just because I know that you're a humble guy and probably won't say this, so just for the sake of the viewers, I'll tell them that you've won the Bronze Star and also a Purple Heart. Yes. So you're really truly an American hero, and I'm really quite honored that you're here, and I appreciate you so much for all that.
Well, thank you very much for that. It was definitely my honor to be able to serve at the capacity that I could, and for me, it was quite the honor to be able to serve with my heroes. Not everyone has an opportunity to do that.
Well done. That's great. And so now I think about the transition, right? You've done all of that, and now you're set to come back to the United States. And just to jump ahead, you go from that and that level of performance and that level of intensity, and you come back and you end up in the cannabis business. Yeah. So help me connect the dots on those two things, because it's going to seem for a lot of people like a big jump.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very interesting path I took to get there. When I left the Marine Corps, I went and worked for an ed tech firm, was doing really well, making some good money, but wasn't really fulfilled. And that's when I started seeing what was going on with our veterans, and myself being 100% disabled as well. So we formed our nonprofit called Bowder Brothers Foundation, where we wanted to help out vets on a personal, medical, and economic side. And during that whole entire process, I was just having a really rough time sleeping. I was just kind of dealing with my own little personal demons. And that's when I was introduced to medical cannabis. And the first time I used it, I had a great night of sleep, and kind of sat back and thought about it and said, how can we make this something impactful? There's been a lot of great veteran advocacy groups out there. I'm part of one called the Veterans Action Council. But I really wanted to have an opportunity to talk with some members of Congress to see what gaps could we fill for them? Like, what are we missing here? And when I talked to some of the legislators, they pretty much said, listen, behind closed doors, I would say to you, yeah, cannabis probably works, but without data, I would never go in front of a camera and back it up. So they're listen, you can get American doctors and you can get data, you're going to have a very good argument. So through this whole process, we were able to join up with a group called Niamedic Healthcare Research Services out of Israel, who specializes in cannabis research. And then also brought on the University of California at Irvine with their health department, which is our American doctors. And we submitted for an institutional review board and were approved for it, which means we've been cleared by the government to do human trials with it. And the funny thing was, where Helmand Valley Growers really came from, it was kind of a means to an end, where we're like, this is going to be a very expensive research odyssey we're going on. We won't take money. The federal government probably won't give us money for do that. We're dealing with cannabis. So we looked at a Paul Newman salad dressing bottle and went 100% of profits to charity. And that's when we said, hey, let's just get an adult use brand out in California, and we'll take 100% of our profits to fund our cannabis research. And essentially, with our first $50,000 worth of profits, that's what it costs to develop our IRB study design. We put that right there into the study, and we continue to do that today with all of our profits. We just take it back and put it into fund our research.
That's really quite incredible. There are so many people who talk about, we donate a portion of a slice of a little bit, and it sounds like you guys' commitment is so much more profound.
Absolutely. This is probably the most important mission of my life. And, I'm all in. So we're going to make this happen.
That's fantastic. One of the first, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this fellow, one of the first veterans that I interviewed was a guy named Boone Cutler. He was U.S. Army, he was a paratrooper. Have you heard of him?
I have heard of him, yes.
Yeah, he created the Spartans Pledge also, so he's known for that as well. And he created a company called Warfighter Hemp out of Colorado. And similarly, they did it a little bit differently than you're doing. They gave their money directly to veterans' families, especially those who had taken their own lives. So that was his sole focus. He really had a rough go. He got hit by a mortar and had 17 surgeries and stuff, and had a similar journey to yours, though, where except for a lot more opioids in Walter Reed, but in trying to get out of that and get out of that sort of zombie drug kind of cycle that so many of you guys are in after you've been wounded. And he missioned himself that way. So that was a profound experience as well.
Wow. Yeah, it's tremendous. You love hearing those stories about these great Americans who did so much for our country. Then they, get out, and now it's kind of their turn to be in the private sector, and they still have that, I call it like the sheepdog syndrome. You still want to serve and give back. And this is very tremendous what some people do.
Remarkable. Is there anything else you want to tell me? You talked about the Battle Brothers Foundation. Is there anything else you wanted to say specifically about that? And we can include links to, things that you'd like to include as well. Anything you'd like, really.
Yeah, I think one thing I love talking about is where our company came from, meaning Helmand Valley Growers Company.
Okay.
It's our way to kind of honor the legends of Helmand. As a Marine Raider, when you serve in the Helmand province, you become part of the Helmand Valley Gun Club and you get an HVGC tattoo. So when we were developing this company, we wanted to keep a military niche. And we threw HVGC up on the wall and said, hey, Helmand Valley Growers Company. And I went and talked to the guys and said, I'm going to have to trademark this, so on and so forth. Are you guys good with it? And they're like, hey, not only are we good with it, but we want to get a job with you when we get out.
There you go. There you go.
And it's a great way, too, for us to have the opportunity to talk to about some of those legends who gave everything they had over there. That this is kind of in memory of their service. So someone we're just extremely proud of, and what is really humbling is how much people have come around and gravitated towards us. Even people in the cannabis community, they will do things and they want to donate right back to us. And technically we're competitors, but I think everyone understands this is one mission, one fight. So it's just been an outstanding experience.
Oh, that's so great. Tomorrow, in fact, I'm doing a news section, a segment on ethical practices, but really flipping it around, which is to talk about how the consumers actually have power in this, and they can actually turn their dollars to do good work as well if they choose to, and not just go to the closest dispensary they can find or the nearby shop or some such, but actually go put their dollars to work in a good way. So I'm going to mention you guys if you don't mind.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. You guys are out of San Diego, though, right?
That is correct.
And are you only a growing operation, or tell me now a little bit more about all the scope of the work that you guys do? Because I know it's a little bit more than that.
Yeah, it was great. We we fell under a lucky star, and two gentlemen who've been very successful in the cannabis community, George and Cody Sadler, really brought us in underneath their wing, and basically have supported us the whole way through this. Where we were probably one company in America that could actually get product on the shelf with $0. I mean, they're like, listen, get it on. We'll pay for everything. You just make us whole. We're not taking any money from you. We want you guys to keep all the profits. So. We started off really basic with distillate with an indica hybrid sativa and expanded from there. And now we provide distillate, live resin, pre-rolls. We're about to have a really cool thing come out here in February that we're kind of currently working on now, but we're going to expand more into the flower phase here. And the big thing is we're rapidly growing, and we got a lot of projects on the hopper, but it's going to be another opportunity for us to coincide with Battle Brothers Foundation to help veterans find work. We're going to offer them opportunity to work with us, whether it be in the sales world, manufacturing, cultivating, whatever it may be. But I just think it's a turn on for a lot of veterans where it's still somewhat of an austere environment and the rules are kind of being made up as we go. And that's a lot like warfare. So it's kind of a really cool thing where you're seeing veterans kind of gravitate towards this community. And I just think it's going to make it that much more stronger.
That's outstanding. That's fantastic. I have a couple of other, maybe offline we can talk about. I have a couple of other dispensary opportunities that may be good for you, maybe a good match for you. So we'll see.
fantastic.
Yeah, happy to. Tell me a little bit more then about the other two fellas, Andy and Matt, if you wouldn't mind. I know they're not here today, but it'd be great to hear about them.
Yeah, no, Andy really was kind of the guy who, was really probably the first guy who introduced me to cannabis, where he was just telling me what helped him. And he had a very impactful saying that really triggered me, where he said, "This has helped me transition from a warrior to a gardener." And that's when I just thought, like, hey, that's a pretty impactful statement. And we really started looking at like the agritherapy and everything that cannabis can do. So Andy's just an outstanding guy, wears his heart on his sleeve, and, it's just very fortunate to have him around. And, Matt kind of came on kind of towards the end after the kind of concept came through. Really, this concept was developed back in 2016. And, Matt kind of jumped on around the 2019 timeframe to kind of help out. But, he believed in the mission, and, very good things with him.
That's perfect. Hey, just real quick, are you guys strictly on the medical side or medicinal side, or are you on the adult use side?
So we're on the adult use side, and what will happen is, so through our research, this will be something that will be offered, throughout all the dispensaries, but it'll be the first thing we'll have medical data backing it. But the ultimate end state is, once we get through our 3 studies, we would do 2 here in California. We're going to do our 3rd and final one in a different state. But at that point, we'll have a treatment and a formulation protocol developed. And once that goes through and we can show that it's repeatable and accessible, having the same results, we will go back in front of Congress. I'll raise my right hand saying, here's your data, here's your American doctors. Can we proceed with FDA trials? And I will not stop until medical cannabis is available in the VA pharmacies and can be prescribed to veterans who it would help them or help benefit them.
Yeah, good luck to you. There's the battles are still ongoing, even in some of these states. Like you see what's happening in Mississippi and South Dakota. Even though the voters have supported it and the voters have approved it, the governor comes back and pulls a trick or pulls a fast one, this and that. You've probably been reading about what the governor of Mississippi is saying about how he wants to cut medical patients' daily allocation in half because he thinks it's too much. He doesn't know anything about cannabis at all.
Right.
He thinks that's a big number. It's too big a number for his head to get around. He wants to cut their medicine in half.
It's just really alarming when you hear that, and you have people who are in these decision-making positions and they're uneducated on what's going on. I mean, I can even say, dealing with the whole opiate crisis, America, we tend to knee jerk. And at one point we're like, hey, you know what? These opiates are really bad. Well, let's stop giving it to them. Well, I know of numerous veterans who committed suicide because they were just cut off clean from opiates. And you can't do that to people.
That's rough.
And then, you're seeing here with cannabis where people are like, I know nothing about it, but I'm going to make a law about it because I'm here. That's why I always tell people, go out and vote. We had situations where we were in San Diego where we had people in elected positions who were just completely misinformed. And we use the power of the vote, and they're no longer in that position. So, people will come around. I mean, you're starting to see things now move in the United States Congress on both the House and the Senate side with both Democrats and Republicans, where things are starting to kind of turn around, and they're starting to see, hey, maybe we should start looking at some of these alternative medications. So again, people tend not to like to go out and vote for whatever reason. But that's one of our most important civic duties. And if you really feel strongly about something, go out there and make your voice heard, because you can't have someone up there in that glass tower just making a decision saying, I'm just going to cut it because that number looks big to me, with no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, 100% agree. And education is such a big deal. There's been so much misinformation and poor information and propaganda, frankly, for so many years. It really is tough to get through that and turn people around and get them to see things in a whole new way. It's a lot of work.
It's tremendous, but we're getting there, and that's what I love about the opportunity with what we're doing on our research side. But you have a lot of other people out there who are jumping on research, like schools like University of Pennsylvania, and they're not going to be working with the NIDA or National Institute of Drug Abuse. They're going to work with private farms. We have a private IRB. It's going to be our own stuff that we're working. And eventually, the legislators are going to get hit from the left and the right and from above with numerous studies coming in, all pretty much saying similar things that we're seeing in Israel. And the numbers don't lie. You can't deny it. So I think we're on the tipping point of some really amazing things here to change the medical landscape of our country.
I think that's strong. I just read last week that there were 2,500 peer-reviewed papers written last year on cannabis research alone, 2,500. So, that's a steep incline, and that's important work.
Yep, absolutely.
Is there anything, Brian, in terms of the company or products that you'd particularly like to talk about? I want to make sure that we get out the information about where we can find you, your company, your products, et cetera, and make sure that we get that information out there to viewers as well.
Yeah, that's great. So, unfortunately, as the laws go, what we grow here in California can only be sold in California. So if you are in California, you're visiting, check out our website, hvgcompany.com. We have a little map on there where you can plug in where you are in your area code, and you can find the closest dispensary that provides Helmand Valley Growers Company product. We can't say anything that we have anything medically backed. We can just say from our personal experiences, but everything we've used or we developed has been through feedback from veterans who are suffering with post-traumatic stress that has benefited them. And that's what we just try to meet their needs. And we're having some really good results from that. And then also too, if you just want to help us out in any way, you go to our nonprofit, BattleBrothersFoundation.org, and donate. We do a lot of things with the money and help out a lot of vets in different ways. And, I always would laugh when I hear those commercials, like every dollar counts, but now being a guy in this position, trust me, every dollar counts. So whatever you do to help, we would be truly blessed and thankful for.
Fantastic. Well, it's been really great to chat with you today, and I'm so glad you were able to take the time from your busy schedule. I really appreciate you, and say hello to the other guys for me, please. I hope. And again, we'll keep in touch on these other issues, like other dispensary opportunities, and maybe even other military or veteran-oriented kind of projects that I might hear about and might be helpful to you as well.
Fantastic. I appreciate the time today, sir.
All right, Brian. Thank you so much. Take care.
All right, you too.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.